Chapter 1. Izuku Midoriya is a 14-year-old powerless boy living in a world where the extraordinary is ordinary and the normal is unnatural. For as long as he could remember, he's always wanted to be a hero. However, he had to come to terms with a few facts of his life. The first, not all men are created equal. The way that he was treated like glass by his mother and like trash by his peers and teachers is proof of that. The second, he'll have to work 10 times harder than anyone else if he wants to get anywhere in life, much less be a hero. And the third, never forget who you are and what you want out of life, because it's the only thing you'll ever truly have in life. However, his hero, his idol, the number one hero and symbol of peace, had left him on a rooftop alone after telling him that no, he couldn't be a hero without a quirk. The way that All Might said it left no room for question or argument, and was said with such finality that Izuku's hopes and dreams shattered in an instant from the moment those words left his lips. So, here Izuku stands at the top of the building where he was left with nothing but his pain and despair. What's the point in living if nothing I ever do will ever be good enough for the people around me? What's the point in trying if I'm always going to be treated like trash? What's the point in continuing any further if I'll never be happy, much less content with my life? No sobs escape his lips despite the never-ending tears that flow like a trickling fountain from his eyes. Izuku realizes that this is simply how his life is, and it isn't going to change for the better. He could become a villain, but causing pain was never what he wanted, and all it would do is hurt him even more than he already is. He thinks about his mother, and despite her not being supportive of his dream, he knew that she was doing her best, and that she just wanted him to be safe. But aside from his dream, she was all he had. Considering how much stress he causes her and her age, not to mention the dangers of the world they live in as well as his own luck, Izuku places his bets that his mom will die long before he will, leaving him alone in a world that has never cared for him. He understands that if anything were to happen to him, it would cause his mom great pain, but perhaps without the burden of his existence, she may be able to find peace and happiness. Maybe she'll find someone whom she can fall in love with and have a child with them, or perhaps they could adopt. It's at that moment that Izuku makes his choice. These thoughts have plagued his mind ever since he was 10 years old, but he never acted on them because of his hope, his dream, and his love for his mother. Now all he has is his mother, and she would be better off without him. So Izuku climbs over the railing of the building and looks down at the alleyway below him, where he sees trash littering the sides of the walls. If he were to fall from this height, he likely won't survive. But that's the point. It's the only way to end his pain, his torment, his suffering. I'm sorry, Mom, but I just can't do it anymore. I wish I was half as strong as you, but I'm not. I know that you'll be better off without me, and I know it'll hurt, but you don't have to worry about me anymore. You need to find your own happiness just like how I know you can. I'm sorry, goodbye, and I love you. Izuku leans forward until he's falling down into the alleyway. His body hits the concrete. But in that moment, black and green energy envelopes him and bursts from the alleyway, much to the bypasser's shock and surprise. The civilians run away in fear of it being a villain attack, but when the energy subsides, Izuku is lying on the ground. Izuku opens his eyes and realizes that he's still alive, but he isn't in any kind of pain, so he pushes himself up and notices there isn't any blood on the pavement. Izuku asks aloud in a cold and detached tone, what happened? That fall should have killed me, but somehow I'm still alive. He raises a hand to feel his head to see if there's any blood, but pulls back to find himself completely fine. Izuku stands up completely as he continues looking at his hand. I should at the very least be somewhat injured from a fall of that height. It's then that he notices his speech is different. There's no stutter, no anxiousness, no energy whatsoever. In fact, he doesn't feel anything. No pain, no despair, no suffering. Nothing. Izuku wonders what happened to him before he hears an explosion in the distance that catches his attention, so either by habit or curiosity, he heads in the direction of the explosion. When he arrives, he sees an alleyway engulfed in flames with the same sludge villain that attacked him earlier with another hostage. Izuku knows that he should be feeling fear or guilt for distracting All Might and letting the villain get away, but he doesn't feel anything and isn't even disturbed by that, just indifferent. He hears the heroes constantly make excuses for why they can't save the hostage, But Izuku has already thought of 3 different ways they could use their quirks to save the hostage in a matter of seconds. Death Arms says aloud, "We need to wait for someone with the right quirk to show up." Izuku comments to himself in the same cold tone, "Fools." Izuku suddenly appears before the sludge villain. He's not sure how exactly he got there, but he doesn't really care, because if those heroes aren't going to do anything, then he might as well do something. The sludge villain jumps back and surprises you again. "What the hell are you doing here? What the hell happened to your eyes?" Izuku thinks to himself, "My eyes." Izuku doesn't notice how the hostage's eyes widen in shock along with All Might, who is in the crowd. The sludge villain raises a tendril to attack Izuku. "It doesn't matter. I've already got a hostage, so I'll just kill you." The villain swings the tendril downward, but to Izuku it's almost as though he's moving in slow motion before he raises his left hand and chops through the tendril with such speed and finesse that the sludge splatters against the wall. To the civilians, it looked as though the villain's tendril had just exploded before they noticed that Izuku had moved his arm. Izuku should feel surprised and shocked by the power he suddenly possesses, but he doesn't, and instead focuses on the task at hand, saving the hostage. The villain stares in shock and fear before Izuku asks, "You'll kill me?" Izuku gazes into the villain's eyes. "I've already tried killing myself, so what makes you think you could do any better?" The sludge villain backs away as fear begins to consume him. "What the hell is this kid? It's like he's a completely different person." Izuku then demands as he lowers his arm, "Release the hostage now, or else I'll have to use my newfound power against you." Death Arms yells out behind him, "Get out of there, kid. That villain will kill you." Izuku ignores Death Arms and the other heroes as his eyes bore into the villain. The villain, overcome with fear, turns to flee down the alleyway, but just as he turns, Izuku appears before him again with the same detached expression. Izuku then says, "If you won't surrender them peacefully, then I'll just have to force you to release them." In an instant, Izuku flashes in front of the villain and grabs his left eye before ripping it out and crushing it in his hand, causing the villain to scream in agonizing pain and subsequently release the hostage, who falls to the ground coughing out sludge. It's at that moment Izuku realizes as he looks down that the hostage is Katsuki Bakugo, the person who made it his mission to make Izuku's life a living hell. But still Izuku feels nothing. After Bakugo regains his bearing, he looks up to glare at Izuku, but he quickly notices that Izuku has changed. He notices that Izuku's hair is completely black instead of its usual green. His pupils are slit like a cat's, his skin is pale white, and he has green tear tracks running down his face from his eyes. But what uneases him most is the cold, unfeeling eyes staring down at him as though he were an insect. The sludge villain, now completely enraged, yells out as he raises a tendril at Izuku, "You bastard! I'll kill you!" Izuku's eyes glances upwards at the villain and readies himself to defend. But before he has the chance, All Might swoops in his hero form, who defends Izuku and Bakugo from the attack. "I really am pathetic. I told you what it took to be a great hero, but I see now that I wasn't living up to my own ideals." Izuku thought that he should feel inspired or perhaps frustrated, but he doesn't, so he looks on with emotional detachment as All Might yells out, "Detroit Smash." Bakugo, the heroes, and the civilians all cover themselves from the gust of wind that destroyed the sludge villain's body, but Izuku stands still, completely unmoved and unfazed by the attack. After the battle is over, Izuku looks at his right hand as he thinks to himself, "What's wrong with me? Where did this sudden power come from? Why don't I feel anything? Is this a quirk? Is this my quirk?" Izuku looks up as he hears Death Arms yell out as he stomps towards him with Kamui Woods following behind him. "What the hell were you thinking back there, kid? Do you have any idea how dangerous it was to run into a situation you couldn't handle?" Izuku replies as he stares at the hero before him, "It's a hero's job to save and protect others, whether or not if they think they can handle the situation." Death Arms and Kamui's eyes widen in shock at such a quick yet cold reply. "Besides, if I recall correctly, you said that you had to wait for someone with the right quirk to show up. You didn't specify a hero. So, would you have preferred for me to stand idly by like you and the other heroes were doing while Bakugo was suffocating?" Death Arms answers, shaken by Izuku's words, "You're just a kid and completely untrained. You could have gotten the hostage killed, or even became a hostage yourself, or gotten yourself killed." Izuku calmly retorts, "But I didn't." Death Arms looks at Izuku in shock as he explains, "I've been studying quirks since I was 4, their strengths, weaknesses, applications, as well as combinations with other quirks. I've also studied heroes as well, including yourself and Kimui Woods. Death Arms takes a step back as he and Kimui Woods stare in shock as Izuku continues, any hero here could have taken this villain down if you had simply gone for the eyes like I did. Or for Kimui, he could have simply reached in with his wood and pulled Bakugo out, or Backdraft could have used his water to dilute the villain's body. Even Mount Lady could have simply reached down and plucked Bakugo from the villain, yet none of you did anything. Death Arms and Kimui Woods take a step back in fear as they were dissected by this 14-year-old boy. Izuku then asks, so then, should I have just stood by while you all were willing to let a child die by the hands of a villain? Death Arms and Kimui Woods both begin to tremble in fear. Who the hell is this kid, and why am I so afraid of him? What really unnerves them is the fact that Izuku hasn't changed expressions once and hasn't even blinked since the battle ended. It's like he's staring into their souls. Both heroes back away as they feel a vast difference in power between themselves and the boy that stands before them. But they're shaken out of the stupor as Izuku closes his eyes and walks past them without a second thought. All Might watches Izuku leave out of the corner of his eye as the crowd split apart to let Izuku pass. As Izuku walks home, he thinks about what had happened and how he got his quirk. It seems that when I tried to kill myself, my quirk had manifested. It kind of reminds me of hysterical strength, where a person suddenly becomes immensely powerful during a stressful situation. That would explain my quirk's sudden manifestation. However, I still don't understand why I don't feel anything. Is it due to the shock of my suicide attempt, or does it have to do with my quirk? Will this be permanent, or will my emotions suddenly return to me over time? Izuku is broken out of his thoughts when he suddenly hears a familiar voice call out Deku. Izuku stops before he turns to look at Bakugo, who is standing a few feet away from him, trying to catch his breath. Bakugo then asks with a glare, what the fuck happened to you? Izuku then replies, what do you mean? Bakugo yells, don't bullshit me. What the fuck happened to you? How did you suddenly get a quirk? Have you been lying to me this entire time and laughing at me behind my back? Izuku answers completely unfazed, I have never lied to you, Bakugo. Izuku's answer shocks Bakugo more than he thought it would. I have also never laughed at you behind your back, because there was nothing to ever really laugh about. As for how I got my quirk, I'm fairly certain I got it when I tried to kill myself. Bakugo's eyes widen in shock as he quietly asks, what? Izuku explains, before you were attacked, I had met a famous hero. At the time I was of course quirkless, so I asked him if I could become a hero even without a quirk. Of course, the answer was no. Bakugo is completely overtaken at how calm Izuku is. After that, I realized just how painful my future would be, as well as the fact my mom would be better off without me. So, with nothing else to live for, I fell off the top of a building. Bakugo starts trembling at Izuku's explanation of his own suicide attempt. Izuku continues, I never felt any pain. I'm guessing that at the point of impact my quirk had manifested and likely prevented my death. From what I can tell, my quirk has enhanced my speed, strength, and perception, but for some reason I no longer feel any emotions. I'm guessing that has something to do with my quirk, or perhaps I'm still in shock from my suicide attempt or the attack. I'm not sure when or if my emotions will come back, and to be honest, I don't want them to return. Bakugo asks in shock why. Izuku answers as he looks Bakugo straight in the eyes, because emotions are useless. Bakugo falls to his knees at Izuku's statement, all they had done was cause me pain and suffering. They drove me to my suicide attempt just as much as the rest of the world did. So, I'd rather not have emotions if it means that I won't have to deal with that kind of pain ever again. Bakugo's lips tremble as he holds back his tears in frustration. He caused this, it's his fault that Izuku tried to kill himself. He's the one who suggested it. What kind of hero tells someone to kill themselves? Izuku breaks Bakugo from his thoughts as he asks, I'm curious though, why do you care? Bakugo looks up at Izuku in surprise as Izuku continues to look down at him with those same cold eyes waiting for his response. Bakugo opens his mouth and closes it before he answers, I don't know why. I hated you. Ever since we were kids, I hated you. I always felt like you were looking down on me, that you thought you were better than me, because you tried to help me when no one else did. Izuku waits as Bakugo explains back, when I had fallen into that river, no one else had come down to check on me. I was supposed to be the best. I shouldn't have needed anyone's help. Then you You came down and tried to help me like I was some sort of weakling. Bakugo glares at Izuku. I didn't need your help then, and I don't need your help now. Izuku stares down at Bakugo before he comments, I think I understand now. You hated me because you didn't understand me. Bakugo's eyes widen in surprise as Izuku continues, I was the weakest one of all. So to see me trying to help you, you thought that I was somehow looking down on you. However, that wasn't the case. The reason why I went to help you was because you were my friend. Bakugo stares in shock at Izuku's words, as if the very thought that Izuku cared about him had never crossed his mind. Bakugo then asks, almost begging, then why? Why did you save me back there? Izuku answers simply, because saving people is what heroes do. Bakugo's entire world shatters from Izuku's words. I didn't save you because you were my friend, because we haven't been friends for a very long time, and I didn't save you for any personal reason either. The villain had a hostage. The heroes on the scene weren't doing anything, and I knew that whoever was being held captive wouldn't last much longer without a breath of air. So, since no one else did anything at the time, I did. Bakugo lowers his head, closes his eyes as tears force their way through, clenches his fists, and punches the ground as he yells out, damn it. Bakugo continues punching the ground. Even when you're fucking broken, you're still trying to be a hero. Even after trying to kill yourself, you still try to save someone else. Bakugo looks up at Izuku as he yells, what the hell's wrong with you? Izuku waits for a moment for Bakugo to catch his breath before he answers, I don't know. Bakugo looks at Izuku in shock. All I've ever wanted to do was help people. That's all there is to it. Bakugo realizes in that moment that even when Izuku is so damaged to the point he no longer has any emotions, to be put through so much pain that he would try to kill himself, to finally manifest a quirk after so many years of pain, Izuku is still and always has been more of a hero than he has been. No matter how powerful Bakugo was, Izuku was always more of a hero than him, because heroes don't just win for the sake of beating villains, they win to save, protect, and help others. Bakugo may have been stronger than Izuku, but it was always Izuku's heroic spirit that surpassed him no matter what. Yet still, after everything Izuku has gone through, despite how broken he is, he's still better than him. Izuku then says, I'm not going to tell anyone. Bakugo looks up at Izuku in surprise as he quietly asks, what? Izuku answers, I'm not going to tell anyone what you did, because if I did it would only cause more problems than it would solve. If you still want to be a hero, then that's up to you. If you want to be something else, then that's also up to you. I'm not going to stand in your way. However, I won't let you hurt anyone else like how you hurt me ever again. Bakugo swallows tightly as he stands up with blood on his knuckles. I'm never going to give up on being a hero. I'm still going to be the #1 hero, and I will beat you even with your newfound quirk. Izuku replies with a nod, I look forward to it. Even though Bakugo knows that Izuku no longer has emotions, he feels as though for the first time in a long time, he managed to make a connection with him. As Izuku and Bakugo part ways, All Might appears out of an alleyway. I am here. Izuku blinks before he asks, what do you want, All Might? All Might coughs before he deflates into his civilian form. I came to find you to apologize. All Might says as he looks Izuku in the eyes, I'm sorry for what I said to you back on that rooftop. I see now that you had more than enough potential to be a great hero. Izuku replies, it's fine. I understand that you meant well. All Might then says with a small smile, thank you, young man. But there was another reason why I wanted to come looking for you. Izuku states, it's about my sudden quirk, right? All Might replies, caught off guard, right? Izuku answers, it appeared shortly after you had left. At the time I was drowning in my pain and despair, so I guess after all the stress I've collected over the years my quirk had finally manifested. All Might asks, what do you mean? Izuku answers as he looks All Might in the eyes, it isn't a secret as to how quirkless people are treated. I'm sure you've heard or read enough horror stories to have an idea of what it's like for quirkless people. All Might understands what Izuku means. It had been hard when he was still quirkless, and he had read online of the disturbing things quirkless people had to endure as well as the suicide rates. Suddenly it clicks. All Might then asks as his chest tightens, young man, you didn't. Izuku answers before All Might finishes his question, it doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. I have a quirk now, which means I won't be treated like I'm quirkless anymore. All Might immediately realizes that Izuku hadn't answered his question, which means that what he thought Izuku did had actually happened. Izuku says it's getting late. I'm sure my mom's worried, especially if she's seen the news, so goodbye, All Might. Izuku leaves All Might, who is still standing there realizing what he had done to the innocent, hopeful, young boy he had met earlier that day, and how different he was to the cold and detached young man he just spoke with. As Izuku opens the door to his apartment, he calls out, "I'm home." His mom crashes into him as she pulls him into a tight hug. "Izuku, why would you run in like that? Do you know how worried I was? I thought I was going to lose you." Even though Izuku doesn't feel guilty, he still apologizes. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I couldn't just stand by and do nothing while someone needed help." Inko pulls away as she finally takes in Izuku's appearance. "Izuku, what happened to you?" Izuku answers, "Simply my quirk finally manifested." Inko's eyes widen in shock. She doesn't know whether to be happy, shocked, or frightened of the idea that Izuku somehow manifested his quirk. Inko asks, How did it manifest? What happened?" Izuku considers to tell her the truth, but recalls how emotional she was, and the thought that he would try to kill himself would no doubt destroy her. So he says, "I don't know. It just happened." To be fair, Izuku only assumed that his quirk manifested due to the stress of his suicide attempt, so there's no real way for him to know for certain if that is the case. Inko concedes as she lets go of Izuku. "All right then. Tomorrow we'll go see a quirk specialist and get it registered. Why don't you go get cleaned up while I get supper ready, okay?" Izuku replies with a nod. "Okay, Mom." Inko heads into the kitchen while Izuku grabs a clean pair of clothes and heads to the bathroom to take a shower. Izuku locks the door behind him and starts by taking off his shirt. When he does, he glances at the mirror and notices his new appearance. However, what really catches his attention is the gaping hole in his chest. He should be frightened and panicking, but instead he feels nothing, just like before. During Izuku's visit to the doctor, Inko sees the gaping hole in his chest and can't help but cry over the implications of what that means, paired with Izuku's lack of emotion. However, the doctor, who is different from the one from his childhood, writes down what Izuku currently knows and what they found out during their tests. Izuku has incredibly enhanced speed, strength, perception, and durability after they tried to take a blood sample. Eventually, they are able to get a sample of Izuku's blood with his help, which is when they find out about his enhanced healing factor. The doctor comments after the analysis is completed, "It looks as though your quirk is an incredibly powerful enhancer quirk. Recent studies have shown that late bloomers and those who manifested quirks after something traumatic are significantly more powerful than those who manifested their quirks at the age of 4. So, there's no doubt in my mind that your quirk will become even stronger in the coming years." Inko asks as she wipes away her tears, "So, do you think Izuku can become a hero?" The doctor smiles kindly as she answers with a nod, "Yes, I know he can." Inko cries tears of joy for Izuku, who is finally able to achieve his dream after so long. The doctor then asks as she looks at Izuku, "So young Midoriya, what are you going to call your quirk now that it's registered?" Izuku looks down thoughtfully before he answers, looking her in the eyes hollow. The doctor's eyes widen slightly before she asks curiously, "Do you mind if I ask why?" Izuku answers, "Because my quirk didn't manifest until I lost my emotions, or perhaps my emotions were lost when my quirk manifested. I'm not really sure as to which one is the truth. However, the fact remains that I feel nothing. Even though I'm still Izuku, there's no doubt that my emotions is what made me who I was. So without those emotions, I'm just hollow." The doctor comments as she taps her pen against her chin, "That's very poetic, but if you're sure, I'll write it down. Just make sure you don't forget who you used to be." Izuku looks at the doctor curiously as she explains, "Psychology isn't really my specialty, but losing one's emotions usually isn't a good thing. However, since the circumstance is a bit different for you, I hope that you'll remember who you used to be and at least make sure to not worry your mother." Izuku nods as he replies, "I understand. I was actually already planning on doing that. Ever since I lost my emotions, I've been thinking about how I would have reacted, and even though I don't feel guilt, I still remembered what it was like to be in emotional pain. So, I'll try to make sure not to hurt my mom unintentionally." Inko hugs Izuku as she cries, "My baby boy." Izuku simply returns the hug since that's what the old him would have done. The doctor can't help but smile at the scene in front of her. Shortly afterwards, Izuku is given a slip from the doctor to excuse him for being late for class. When he enters, the classroom goes dead quiet as the students take in his new appearance. Izuku walks up to the teacher and hands them the excuse paper. The teacher asks, still surprised by Izuku's appearance, "What's this?" Izuku answers, "It's the excuse the quirk specialist told me to give you to excuse my tardiness." The class bursts with questions. "You actually got a quirk? What's your quirk? What does your quirk do? How strong is your quirk? Is your quirk cool?" The teacher claps their hands to quieten the class before he looks at Izuku. "I think we would all like to hear about your quirk since you didn't have one before." Izuku knows that the students and teachers don't really care about him, but perhaps he can get a little bit of justice for his old self. Izuku answers, "My quirk is an enhancer type. Due to the fact that it manifested so late, the specialist claims that it's far more powerful than most other quirks. I have enhanced strength, speed, perception, durability, and healing. As for how cool my quirk is and what it's called Izuku unbuttons his uniform before pulling his white button-up shirt apart to reveal the hole in his chest, as everyone in the room gasps in shock. Hollow. A wave of fear and guilt washes over the classroom. It's no secret that they treated Izuku like crap, but now he actually has the power to hurt them. The teacher says nervously as Izuku starts buttoning up his shirt. "Yes. Well, why don't you take your seat so that we can finish class? Okay, Midoriya?" Izuku walks to his seat as his classmates stare at him in fear. While Bakugo had been told how Izuku got his quirk, he never thought he'd see the horrific sight of Izuku with a hole in his chest. Not to mention that if Izuku really wanted to, he could end his entire career, and after seeing how the class changed their tune after finding out Izuku manifested a quirk, how quickly would it be for them to turn on him? The rest of the year goes by uneventfully. Bakugo and his cronies leave Izuku alone for obvious reasons. Izuku's grades suddenly surpass Bakugo's for some reason, and Izuku starts training at a beach that had become an illegal dumping ground by cleaning it up. In about a month, Izuku had managed to clean the entire beach due to his newfound strength and speed, after which he started testing out his quirk to see what all he could do. He mostly tested his quirk at night, which was when he found out that he had night vision so that no one was around to see or hear him working. 10 months have passed since Izuku's quirk manifested, and it's now time for the UA entrance exams. Izuku stands before the building gazing up at it. Izuku thinks about how excited and elated he would be if he still had his emotions, but doesn't linger on it too long. The written test was a breeze for Izuku. Now all that was left was the physical exam. While Izuku is changing in his group's designated changing room, a lot of people stare uncomfortably at the hole in his chest, which they see from his back. However, Izuku doesn't realize they're staring and heads out towards the bus once he's done. The drive from the school to the grounds where they'll be testing goes by with most of the participants chatting around him, but he simply sits with his eyes closed and arms crossed as he waits for their arrival. When they arrive, Izuku waits for the beginning of the test before he hears Present Mike yell "Go." He disappears instantly and reappears far ahead of his fellow contestants, then proceeds to start tearing the robots apart with his bare hands. He tears through the robots like they're made of paper and snaps the arms, necks, and joints like toothpicks. Izuku asks aloud when all the robots in his area are destroyed, "Have I really become this strong in such a short amount of time, or are these robots just weak?" Izuku hears some more fighting not too far from him and decides to check it out. Izuku uses Sonito, which is what he calls the move he has that makes himself disappear and reappear in an instant. It's not teleportation, but merely just his speed. Izuku appears on the roof of a building as he looks down to see his fellow examinees fighting against the robots as they call out their points, which are significantly lower than his. Izuku comments to himself, "Well, that answers that question." Izuku already has more than enough to pass, but he's not going to stand idly by when someone needs help. That's not what the old him would do. When Izuku sees someone getting overwhelmed, he appears out of nowhere and destroys the robots before disappearing again. The exam lasts a few more minutes before the ground quakes beneath Izuku's feet, which catches his attention before he sees the giant zero-pointer looming further in the city. Izuku notices how the other examinees are running away from the behemoth while it wreaks havoc on the city. Izuku thinks to himself, this robot needs to be destroyed before it can cause any more damage. However, before Izuku has the chance to move, he hears a female voice cry out, "Help." Izuku looks ahead to see a brown-haired girl with her hand outstretched. "Someone please help me." Something sparks inside of Izuku before he uses his Sonito to appear before the girl, who is caught by surprise from his sudden appearance. "Don't worry, I won't let you die." The girl's eyes widen before Izuku looks up at the robot, which is making its way towards him and the girl. Izuku raises his right index finger pointing at the robot as a small green orb of energy appears before his finger. Then the small orb becomes a blast of green energy that completely erases the top half of the robot's body before it falls backwards with a crash. The girl's eyes widen even more from the amount of destruction Izuku had done before she notices the piece of rubble that was pinning her being lifted and tossed aside like it's just another rock. The girl looks back at Izuku in awe before they hear Present Mike call out "Time's up." Izuku asks as he crouches down to the girl, "Are you hurt?" The girl blushes, realizing she was staring at him before she answers, "I am. I think my ankle might be sprained, plus I have a few scrapes and bruises, but nothing I can't handle." Izuku nods as he replies, "I see. However, it would be painful for you to walk on a sprained ankle." The girl asks in confusion, "Wait, what?" Before the girl has the chance to decline, Izuku picks her up and carries her bridal style, which only causes her entire face to turn red as she covers her face with her hands while her pinkies are outstretched. When Izuku sees Recovery Girl, he walks over as she's checking up on other examinees. "Excuse me, Recovery Girl, but this girl has a sprained ankle and some scrapes and bruises." Recovery Girl looks the girl over as Izuku places her on the ground. "Let's get a look here, dearie." After Recovery Girl has healed the brown-haired girl, she looks behind herself as she says thanks for saving. She realizes that Izuku is gone before she looks around. Where'd he go? Izuku is already changed as he leaves the UA campus. His job was done, so there was no need to stay any longer than he needed to. Meanwhile, in the observation room, the teachers chatter amongst themselves. "That kid was amazing. Did you see what he did to that zero-pointer?" Midnight replies he destroyed the entire upper half of its body in one shot. Cementos comments, "Plus, he managed to save the girl before the exam was over." As the teachers continue talking amongst themselves and awarding rescue points, Aizawa can't help but scowl. That kid could have destroyed all those robots in an instant if he wanted to, yet didn't. If he thinks that he'll be able to get by without using his full power, then he's sorely mistaken. Aizawa asks as he looks at Nedzu, "Can I see that kid's file?" Nedzu replies as he hands Aizawa Izuku's folder, "Of course." As Aizawa opens the folder, he notices a few things. The first is the date that it was updated, which was about a month ago. The second was that Izuku's quirk hadn't manifested until 10 months ago, which caught Aizawa by surprise for a moment before he continued reading. After Aizawa was finished, he thinks to himself, this kid only manifested his quirk 10 months ago? Well, it doesn't matter. That doesn't change the fact that if he wants to stay here, he'll have to prove himself. If he doesn't give his all during the apprehension test, then I'll expel him right then and there. As Izuku opens the door to his apartment, he calls out, "I'm home." Inko, who has lost some weight after Izuku started training, waits at the door for Izuku with a bright smile on her face. "Welcome home, sweetie. How was the test?" Izuku answers as he takes off his backpack, "It was fine. Based on everyone else's scores that I overheard, I'm fairly certain I made it in all right." Inko replies as she claps her hands together, "That's great, sweetie. Tonight, I'll be making katsudan." Izuku says as he hugs Inko, "Thanks, Mom." Izuku still doesn't feel anything, but he knows that that would be what he would do if he still had emotions. Izuku heads into his room and changes his clothes. As he does, he thinks of what he had felt during the entrance exam. When he saw that girl with her hand outstretched, he had felt something, but he's not sure what it was. It's been so long since Izuku has felt anything. It felt more like instinct than anything else, but it was different from when he saved Bakugo. When Izuku saw the desperation in the girl's eyes, he had felt something. Perhaps that's what it was. Izuku thinks to himself, did seeing that girl cry out for help so desperately make me feel the same emotions she felt? Or was it simply an echo from when I still had emotions? If it's the former, then that would mean that there's a way for me to regain my emotions. But if it's the latter, then it would just be another dead end. If Izuku were honest, he would say that he has considered doing things he wouldn't normally do before. But the only reason why he restrains himself is because he doesn't want to hurt Inko, and from the fact that he still remembers how pain felt when he still had emotions, so he doesn't want to do that either. After Izuku has changed, he heads out to continue training. After all, he still needs to gain more control over his quirk due to how powerful it is, and can't always limit himself as he's been doing. Plus, if he's going to be a hero, then he needs to be in top form no matter what. When Izuku receives his letter, He doesn't even bother with the metallic disc. He just looks at which class he'll be in and the map of the school. Izuku says to himself, so, Class 1A. I wonder if Bakugo will be there. Knowing him, he will be. On the first day of school, Izuku walks through the halls as he had memorized the map beforehand. Once he sees the giant door with 1A written on it, he comments to himself, well, that's convenient. As Izuku opens the door, he immediately hears Bakugo arguing with a student wearing glasses. The boy says as he chops his hands, you shouldn't put your feet on your desk. It's disrespectful to your fellow students as well as to those who came before us. Bakugo replies, shut it, Four Eyes. You're not the teacher, and you're certainly not the boss of me. Izuku thinks to himself, somewhat impressed. It seems Bakugo has managed to tone down his anger over the past few months. The boy with glasses pauses before he says, I'm sorry. It seems we've gotten off on the wrong foot. The boy extends his hand. My name is Tinya Ida. I'm from Somei Junior High. Bakugo replies, TCH, Katsuki Bakugo, Aldera Junior High. Ida drops his hand when he realizes Bakugo won't shake it. I'm sorry if I came off as demanding, but I still think you shouldn't have your feet on that desk. Bakugo puts his feet down as he looks away. Whatever. It's at that moment Ida notices Izuku in the doorway, who had been watching the exchange. Ida walks towards Izuku. As he introduces himself, hello, my name is Tinya Ida from Somei Junior High. It's a pleasure to meet you. Izuku thinks to himself, he's pretty intense. Izuku replies as he shakes Ida's hand, my name's Izuku Midoriya from Aldera Junior High. Ida comments, I must say, I was quite impressed by the fact that you discovered that there was another point system. Izuku asks with a tilt of his head, another point system? Ida answers in mild surprise, yes, the rescue points. Izuku asks, there were rescue points? Ida's eyes widen in shock as he asks, you mean you didn't realize there were rescue points until just now? Izuku answers, apparently. Ida's jaw drops before he asks, then why did you destroy the zero-pointer? This catches everyone's attention in the classroom before Izuku answers, because that girl needed help. Ida's eyes widen even more if that's possible before he says, I don't know what to say to that. You are clearly the best example of a hero student here. Izuku replies, that remains to be seen as of yet. After all, you still don't know what our other classmates can do. Before Ida can say anything else, they hear a cheerful voice say from behind Izuku, hey, it's you with the curly hair. Izuku turns to the side to see the girl he had saved during the entrance exam. I never got to thank you for saving me, so thanks for that. Izuku replies with a nod, it's fine. I just did what I thought was right. They then hear a gruff voice say, if you're here to make friends, then leave now. The girl, Ida, and Izuku all see Aizawa laying on the floor in his yellow sleeping bag before they all head to their desks. Aizawa steps out of his sleeping bag before he holds out a gym uniform, put these on, and head out to the training grounds. In the changing room, most of the guys chat amongst themselves until one of them says, dude, what the fuck happened to your chest? All eyes turn to Izuku, who has yet to put his gym shirt on. The guys are all staring in horror at the hole in the center of his chest. Izuku answers, simply, it's a mutation of my quirk. The student with blonde hair and a black lightning bolt asks, does it hurt? Izuku answers with a shake of his head, no, it doesn't hurt. Izuku then continues putting his gym uniform on while some of his classmates' eyes still linger on him with worry. Bakugo comments from behind Izuku, you might want to say that in a better way. Izuku asks as he looks at Bakugo, why's that? Bakugo answers, because they're still fucking freaked out about it. Izuku replies, it's no different from a person with any other mutation quirk. Bakugo counters, yeah, but most people don't have a fucking hole in their chest. Izuku hums thoughtfully before he says, I'll try to think of a better explanation. Once they're all outside, Aizawa states, today you're all going to be taking a quirk apprehension test. This will measure the full capacity of your quirks, so that way we can gauge where you're at, so that way we have a better idea on how to make you into proper heroes. Aizawa tosses a softball to Izuku, who catches it with ease. Midoriya, you got first place in the entrance exam. I want you to go to the center of that circle and throw the ball as far as you can using your quirk. Izuku nods in understanding before he walks to the circle. Izuku pulls his arm back before he throws the ball using only 25% of his power. Izuku then looks at Aizawa, who looks at the phone that says 10 kilometers. When Aizawa shows the students, he says, this is what's expected of you here at UA. If you want to stay here, you're going to have to give it 110%, plus Ultra Style. The students excitedly talk amongst themselves when one of them says how fun it would be. Aizawa then asks, you think this is fun, huh? Aizawa glares at the students before he states, "All right then, whoever gets last place will be expelled from UA High." The girl Izuku had saved comments, "That's not fair. We all worked so hard to get here." Before Aizawa says anything, Izuku replies, "There are many things in life that aren't fair." Everyone looks at Izuku as he explains war, terror, disease, death, destruction, poverty, discrimination. The list of unfairnesses in the world is endless. However, it's a human's job to prevent and counter that unfairness. For heroes, even more so. If you aren't willing to fight that unfairness, then perhaps you should consider a different career. Everyone stares at Izuku in shock at just how cold and emotionless he spoke, but the guys believe that it might be due to his quirk, or more specifically the hole in his chest. The girls, however, think that while Izuku is right, the way he said it was almost cruel in that he didn't even show a shred of emotion. Aizawa thinks to himself, the kid's right, but that doesn't mean that I'll let him skate by without using his full power. It's obvious he could have done more to get the ball to travel farther. Regardless, if he doesn't show his full power, then I'll expel him no matter which place he takes. In the 50-meter dash, Izuku uses Sonito, which causes the machine to say error, meaning he traveled too fast for the machine to comprehend. Izuku then crushed the machine for the grip strength test, as well as caused the machine to say error again for the sidesteps, and he managed to clear the entire field for the standing long jump. Throughout all the tests, Aizawa was getting frustrated with Izuku because of all the potential he had, yet he wasn't even bothering to show his full power. Aizawa tosses the softball to Izuku again. "Midoriya, I want you to throw the ball again." Izuku looks at Aizawa before he asks, "May I ask why?" Aizawa answers with a glare, "Because throughout the entire test you haven't even been trying. You keep getting top scores, but I can tell that we haven't even seen more than 10% of your full power." The students whisper amongst themselves before Izuku counters with, "All due respect, Eraserhead." This catches Aizawa by surprise, since there aren't many who know his hero name, much less recognize him. "If I were to use my full power, there won't be a school left to teach at." Izuku's statement makes all the students' eyes go wide in shock as he continues, "The reason I've been using so little of my power is because it isn't necessary. I've been matching, if not setting the bar for each test except for the softball throw every time. Yet you want me to use my full power even at the cost of everyone's lives. That isn't to say that I don't have control over my quirk, but rather my quirk is far too dangerous to be unleashed over a simple apprehension test. However, I am confused as to why you're singling me out among the entire class." The students look at each other in confusion. "Todoroki has only been using half of his power, yet for some reason you seem to focus solely on me when talking about full power." Aizawa's eyes widen slightly at being caught before Izuku says, "There's nothing my eyes can't see, so it wasn't hard to see how you were focusing on me so intensely. If you're going to force me to use my full power, then the same will have to apply to Todoroki. That's not mentioning the fact that I'll need a lot of space, so as to ensure that I don't accidentally hurt someone." Todoroki glares at Izuku for dragging him into the situation before Aizawa comments, "The reason why I'm not asking Todoroki is obvious." Even though Aizawa didn't say it, everyone knew it had to do with the scar on Todoroki's face. Izuku then says, "Oh, well then in that case." Izuku unzips his jacket before pulling up his shirt to reveal the hole in his chest. "I suppose this will suffice." The girls all gasp and cover their mouths in horror at the sight, while Aizawa's eyes widen in shock as he thinks that wasn't in his file. The guys, of course, are still disturbed by the sight, even after seeing it in the changing room. Izuku continues as he lets go of his shirt. "However, if that's not enough for you, then how about this? About a year ago, I lived my life completely quirkless." Everyone except Bakugu's eyes widen in shock. Bakugu, however, looks away uncomfortably. "I was beaten, bullied, neglected, and abused by my teachers and peers. All I ever wanted to be in life was a hero, because I believed that saving and helping others was the most amazing thing a person could do. But according to some of my former bullies, I didn't know my place." Everyone reels back in disgust of the behavior Izuku had to endure. "However, if you wish to hear an example, before I got my quirk, I was told by one of my bullies, if you want to be a hero so badly, there might just be another way. Pray for a quirk in your next life, then take a swan dive off the roof of a building." Once the words leave Izuku's mouth, Aizawa and the students step back in horror at the words they had just heard. Izuku then says, "However, that's not the worst part. Not too long afterwards, I had met a top-ranking hero, and I asked him if it were possible to become a hero even without a quirk. The hero told me that it's okay to dream, but that I had to be realistic and that he didn't think anyone without a quirk could become a hero. Aizawa clenches his fist in righteous anger. At the time, I was overcome by so much pain, despair, and hopelessness. My entire life I was told that I was worthless and useless, that I was nothing but a burden to everyone around me. So, I took the dive. Aizawa's heart shatters when he hears the words while the students, including Todoroki, look like they want to vomit while also feeling disturbed over Izuku's emotionless retelling of his life. Izuku looks down as he places his hand over the hole in his chest. Once I hit the ground, my quirk had manifested. I'm not sure if it manifested in order to preserve my life, or if it manifested due to the stress, or if it would have only manifested if I had done what I did. However, Izuku looks back at the crowd when it manifested. I lost all of my emotions. Even right now, I feel nothing. I don't even feel any anger or hatred towards the ones who had hurt me. I don't even blame them or the hero for what happened to me. Izuku then says the only reason why I'm here and trying to be a hero is because it's all I've ever wanted in life when I still had emotions. I still want to be a hero because I remember how it felt to be hurt, to be lost, to be left out in the cold, dark, unfeeling world. I want to ensure that no one ever has to feel like I had for all those years when I was quirkless. That's why I'm here. Aizawa stands there still in shock as he's trying to comprehend everything he had just been told before he pulls himself together. Very well then. I won't make you retake the test. Izuku replies, oh no, I didn't tell you that because I didn't want to retake the test. Not that I want anything anyway, but because I didn't want you to expel me over not using my full power. Aizawa blinks owlishly as he thinks he said all that just so that way I wouldn't expel him. Once Aizawa saw the hole in Izuku's chest, that was enough to not push him to use his full power. After hearing Izuku's story, Aizawa wanted nothing more than to beat every person who had hurt Izuku before, while also kicking himself for being so cruel. Izuku goes to the center of the circle as he says you all might want to stand about 10 meters back behind some cover and cover your ears with soundproof earmuffs. Aizawa and the students all run back behind cover while Yaoyorozu creates soundproof earmuffs for everyone. After Izuku sees Aizawa give the go-ahead, he throws the ball just as he did before, but then fires the energy blast which he used before, which he calls Zero. The ball gets sent flying out of the stratosphere thanks to the Zero pushing it upward. Aizawa reveals to the class that Izuku got the same score as Uraraka, Infinity. The rest of the tests go by without any more interruptions. The entire class eyes Izuku worriedly after revealing his past as he did. However, Izuku feels nothing and pays no mind to the eyes that are on him. All that matters is passing the test, nothing more. Once the test is finished, Aizawa reveals the scores. Izuku is at the top, while someone by the name of Mineta Minoru is at the bottom. A kid with purple balls on his head cries out, no. This can't be happening. I haven't even got to touch any boobs yet. Izuku asks with quirked eyebrow, that's why you're crying? Aizawa says, Mineta, pack your things, you're expelled. Aizawa looks at the rest of the class, everyone else. Your syllabi are on your desks. Make sure you don't waste time tomorrow. The class gulps as they realize Aizawa made good on his threat. Before Aizawa looks at Izuku Midoriya, I want you to come with me for a moment. Izuku follows Aizawa to the side of the building. Before Aizawa says, I want to apologize for what I said earlier. I had assumed that you simply weren't using your power because you thought you could get by without it. I see now that I was wrong. I'm sorry for making my assumption as well as bringing up bad memories. Izuku shrugs as he replies, it's fine. I understand why you would think that, so there's no harm done. As for those bad memories, since I have no emotions, I felt nothing while recollecting those memories. Aizawa looks at Izuku with a pained expression before Izuku asks, is there something wrong? Aizawa answers, you shouldn't have had to have gone through all that, especially at your age. Izuku counters, there are many things outside of our control. That's why we must focus on the things we can control, so that way we can improve society as a whole. Aizawa huffs with a smile before he says as he places a hand on Izuku's shoulder, you'd make a great hero, kid, with or without a quirk. Izuku's eyes widen slightly before he replies with a nod, thank you, sensei. I appreciate the sentiment. Aizawa then says as he retracts his hand, you're welcome. You're good to go now, kid. Izuku bows to Aizawa before he heads to class. When he's leaving the school, he notices Uraraka leaning against the gate as if she's waiting. Uraraka notices Izuku walking towards her before she stands up and faces him. Izuku stops before her as she hesitantly says, I want to properly thank you for saving me and apologize. Izuku hums curiously as he tilts his head to the side. Uraraka explains back, during the entrance exam, I was so scared. When I saw the 0-pointer coming towards me, I thought I was going to die. I thought about how I wouldn't be able to become a hero, how I wouldn't be able to help my parents, how they would be devastated if they had found out I died. Uraraka continues, but then, you saved me, and I didn't get to thank you for it. Uraraka smiles brightly, so thank you for saving me. Izuku's sure if he still had emotions, he'd be a blushing, stuttering mess. Uraraka's expression turns sad, however. I want to apologize. When you had said that the world wasn't fair, I had felt a little angry at you. You were right, but I still felt like it was too extreme, especially for the first day of class. It wasn't until you told us what happened to you that I understood why you said what you did. You weren't talking about just being a hero, but also about being a good person, so I'm sorry for getting angry at you. Izuku replies dismissively, it's all right. I'm sure you weren't the only one. Besides, I'm fairly certain I may have come off as a bit cold. As I said before, I don't have emotions, so not knowing that beforehand certainly didn't help you or the rest of our classmates. Uraraka looks down guiltily, however. Uraraka looks up at Izuku in surprise. It's probably a good thing that you did get angry. After all, it means you're human. Uraraka wants to ask what Izuku means, but decides against it as she shakes her head before she smiles. So, would you like to head to the station together? Izuku replies as he walks beside Uraraka, I don't see why not. Throughout their walk, Uraraka tells Izuku about herself, her parents, along with her likes and dislikes. Even though Izuku doesn't talk much, the atmosphere isn't uncomfortable, and despite Izuku's lack of emotions, he still understands Uraraka's opinions and perspectives while also giving his own and others. The following day goes by like a normal school would, except the students are being taught by heroes. However, at the beginning of the last class of the day, the students are all wondering which teacher would be teaching them for heroics until I am coming through the door like a normal person. The students gasp in shock and surprise as they excitedly chatter amongst themselves about being taught by All Might. Today, we'll be starting with. All Might reveals a card that says, Battle Trial, on it a battle trial exercise. However, first you'll need All Might pulls out a remote before clicking a button causing parts of the wall to extend, reveal suitcases, your hero costumes. The students all hurriedly grab their suitcases before heading to the changing rooms. Izuku's design was fairly simple. His costume wasn't meant for protection since his quirk did that for him. His costume was mostly for aesthetic purposes. Izuku's costume is a white jacket with a high collar as well as long coattails, a black sash, a white hakama, along with white samurai-like sandals with black socks. Once Izuku was done changing, he began walking towards the designated city with his footsteps echoing throughout the hallway. When his classmates see him, it's as though he's exuding an air of superiority and intimidation, as if his very presence was the definition of power, much like how All Might was considered by most as the definition of strength. Uraraka, however, doesn't feel intimidated by him as she walks up to him with a smile on her face, while Midoriya, your costume looks really cool and fancy. Izuku nods as he replies, thank you, Uraraka. Your costume looks good on you as well. Uraraka blushes as she laughs nervously while rubbing the back of her head. Yeah, it's not exactly how I wanted it to look. I should have been more specific about what I wanted. Izuku comments, you could always send in a request now that you know what you don't like or want in your costume. All Might interrupts as he explains the exercise that they'll be doing. Ida then asks as he raises his hand, sir, wouldn't it be best for us to team up with those of us who complement each other? Izuku answers, in most cases you won't get a choice as to who your teammates might be. This method will help simulate the idea of working with people you wouldn't normally work with or with those who don't work well together. It's a means of overcoming our limitations and forcing us to become creative while under pressure so that we don't fail during real-life situations like these. Ida lowers his hand nervously. Ooh, very well, carry on then. The first match is Bakugo and Ida as the heroes versus Izuku and Uraraka as the villains. As Izuku and Uraraka walk into the building, they begin discussing their plan. Outside, Ida asks as he looks at Bakugo. You and Midoriya went to the same middle school, correct? Do you have any idea what he might be planning? Bakugo answers as he grits his teeth in frustration. The Midoriya I knew was weak and cowardly. He wouldn't fight us head on. Instead, he'd come up with some kind of plan to counter our quirks. The Nord has spent over 10 years of his life analyzing quirks, thinking that it'd help him become a hero, and there's no doubt that he's already figured out how my quirk works. But now that he doesn't feel anything and has a quirk, I don't know what he'll do. Ida hums thoughtfully. So then, the odds are stacked against us. Do you know anything about his quirk? Bakugo shakes his head no. The nerd didn't talk much after he lost his emotions. He didn't even mutter like he used to. It was creepy when he'd do it, but not hearing it was even creepier, especially when he'd look at you with those eyes. It was like he was dissecting you every time he looked at someone. He's become strong, maybe too strong. Ida then says while chopping his hands, then we need to face him together as a team and figure out his weakness. Bakugo yells as he snaps at Ida, you idiot. If we tried taking him on together, then the time will run out. I'll take him on myself. I know more about the nerd than you do, so it'll be easier for me to figure out how to beat him while you look for the bomb. Ida nods before a thought occurs. How do you know that he'll be coming after us, and not Uraraka? Bakugo answers as he looks away. That nerd's too powerful to put himself anywhere near the bomb. Meanwhile, in the observation room, All Might can't stop the stabbing pain of guilt that he got when he saw Midoriya during the entrance exam, as well as during the quirk apprehension test. How can I possibly make up for what I did to him? He lost his emotions because of me. He was pushed to the point of committing suicide, and I just turned away without a second thought. I need to make it up to him, but how? Yaoyorozu speaks up. All Might. All Might looks at Yaoyorozu as she points out their time is up. All Might embarrassedly says, ooh, right. All Might then says into the microphone, begin. Ida and Bakugo walk through the halls of the building, scanning the area to make sure there aren't any traps or that they aren't caught by surprise. As they walk up to the third floor, Ida comments, I'm surprised neither Midoriya or Uraraka hasn't done anything yet, or even laid out any traps. Bakugo replies with a nod, yeah, I don't like it. The entire place is practically cleared out. They both stop in their tracks when they hear footsteps echoing from the stairwell to the fourth floor ahead of them. They see Izuku slowly walking down the stairs with his hands in his pockets. Izuku stops a few feet in front of them. Despite not having done anything, his very presence seems to overpower them before Bakugo bites out 4 eyes. You run ahead and get the bomb while I take care of Midoriya. Ida replies with a hesitant nod, right. Izuku allows Ida to run right past him without even glancing at him. Bakugo then gets into a fighting position, but Izuku continues to stand there unfazed. Bakugo grits his teeth in anger before rushing towards Izuku before he delivers a right hook, but Izuku slowly raises his left arm to block it with ease. Bakugo's eyes widen at just how easily Izuku blocked his attack, but what scares him most is how Izuku is looking down on him before he jumps back. Bakugo's heart begins pounding as he thinks, what the hell was that? Izuku then asks, are you afraid? That snaps Bakugo to attention before he realizes what Izuku had just asked. TCH, you think I'm afraid of you just because you've got some creepy-ass stare and a fucking quirk? Izuku counters, then tell me, why did you jump away? Bakugo's feet freeze to the ground at Izuku's question. The Bakugo that I knew would have easily followed up with that right hook, and yet you chose to back away. Why? If not for fear, then why would you retreat from me? Bakugo clenches his fists before he yells out, why the hell would I ever be afraid of you? Izuku answers just as calmly as he always has, I'm not sure. However, there's no doubt that you hold some level of fear for me. Bakugo, for the first time in his life, wants to run. He wants to get away from Izuku as fast as he can, and he's not sure why. Izuku continues, perhaps it's because I'm so much different to how I was before. Perhaps it's because I have a quirk now. Perhaps it's because of how powerful my quirk is. Or perhaps it's because. Izuku makes direct eye contact with Bakugo. You simply can't comprehend what you're seeing. Bakugo can't move as his whole body trembles and thinks, is that what this is? Is this what it feels like to be afraid? Izuku slowly walks towards Bakugo as he says, it's obvious from yesterday's test that I'm significantly more powerful than you. So it must be quite frightening to see someone who used to be nothing suddenly become so powerful in less than a year. Izuku stops directly in front of Bakugo. I wonder, how powerful do you think I'll become a year from now? As the words leave Izuku's mouth, the very thought completely overwhelms Bakugo. If this is how strong Izuku became after only a year, then when will it stop? Will his power double, or even triple? How much power will Izuku amass before they even graduate? What's more, how much of a difference is there between their powers? Can Bakugo even put a scratch on Izuku after what he saw yesterday? Bakugo jumps away from Izuku, which surprises him even if his expression doesn't change. Bakugo says through gritted teeth, "It doesn't matter how strong you are or how strong you become." Bakugo glares at Izuku as he feels a new resolve fill his chest. "I will beat you." Izuku replies, "After a moment, you're a fool to try." Bakugo raises his gauntlet as he counters, "You think that just because you blocked my first attack that means you're invincible?" Bakugo grabs the pin as he yells, "Let's see how you take this." All Might yells out, "Young Bakugo, stop. You'll kill him." Bakugo replies, "Just before he pulls the pin, he'll be alright as long as he dodges." Izuku raises his left hand as the explosion engulfs him and ends up destroying the stairwell along with part of the building. Bakugo chuckles as he says, "You may be strong, but I doubt you could block that." However, with a wave of Izuku's hand, the smoke disperses, revealing steam coming from his left hand with his clothes barely singed while his face still holds the same emotionless expression. Bakugo's eyes widen with fear. Izuku had taken a fully loaded gauntlet explosion and didn't even flinch. "What the fuck are you?" Izuku answers as Bakugo falls to his knees, overcome with fear, "I am hollow." Ida says over Bakugo's calm, "Bakugo, are you and Midoriya alright? I heard the explosion." Bakugo doesn't answer, but simply stares up in helplessness as Izuku walks towards him with that same calm, yet fear-inducing stride. Izuku then says as he looks down at Bakugo, "This fight is over." All Might and the students stare at the screen slack-jawed as they had just saw Izuku get engulfed in flames and came out unscathed if you don't account for the damage done to his costume. Kaminari comments in shock, "Holy shit." Hagakure asks, "Did he seriously just shrug off an explosion that was aimed directly at him?" Kirishima says, "I don't think Manly could even cover that." Todoroki thinks to himself, "Just how powerful are you, Midoriya?" All Might just stands there thinking about how powerful Izuku has become in such a short amount of time and is grateful that Izuku has decided to become a hero. If Izuku had decided to become a villain as he is now, I'm not sure if I could beat him with as little time as I have left if he ever decided to become a villain. All Might focuses on Izuku's cold, emotionless expression. He would make a terrifying villain. Ida stands outside the door that he's been trying to get into for the past couple of minutes, curses. Bakugo won't answer, and this door won't open. It feels like there's a cement wall preventing the door from. At that moment, Ida recalls how the entire building was completely empty. At the time, he had thought that the staff simply hadn't filled the building with any supplies or furniture. However, a thought occurred to him. What if the building did have supplies and furniture, but Izuku and Uraraka simply used them to blockade the door to prevent anyone from entering? Realization dawns upon him as he realizes why Izuku had let him through. It wasn't because he didn't think he wasn't a threat. It was because he knew he wouldn't be able to reach the bomb. Ida grits his teeth in frustration before he shakes his head. "No, my brother wouldn't give up, and neither will I." Moments later, Izuku, Uraraka, Ida, and Bakugo stand before the class. "Now then, would anyone like to explain what went wrong here?" Yaoyorozu raises her hand. "Unfortunately, there wasn't much to the battle. Midoriya and Uraraka managed to gather all the items in the building to barricade the door so that Ida couldn't enter. Bakugo may have been able to blow the door down, but that could have ended up damaging the bomb, which would be a total failure on the hero's part. However, Midoriya shouldn't have allowed Ida to reach the room, especially considering how powerful he is. Aside from barricading the door, Uraraka didn't do much throughout the match, mainly due to her being the one to defend the bomb. Bakugo was also reckless to the point of allowing his emotions to get the better of him and use such a dangerous weapon indoors, which could have damaged the structural integrity. The only one who did well was Ida. He managed to reach the room and did everything in his power to try and break down the door, even though the odds were stacked against him. Izuku remains emotionless while the others look down with varying levels of shame. Uraraka comments, "I know that I didn't really do much, but Izuku was right. This was the best plan for us to win. It may not have been very climactic, but I'm pretty sure most villains wouldn't leave something like this up to chance." Ida adds, "While appreciate your praise, I still don't feel as though I deserve it since I wasn't even able to retrieve the bomb no matter how hard I tried. All Might replies as he looks at Uraraka, "That's all right, you too. You're right, young Uraraka, that any intelligent villain would have stalled the heroes long enough in order to fulfill their plan. Just because you didn't show off your quirk or your abilities doesn't mean that you should be ashamed of that. This was to simulate a real-life heroes versus villain scenario, and you did just as what was expected of you." All Might turns to Ida. "As for you, young Ida, while you may have lost the battle, you still didn't give up when all hope seemed lost. That's a trait that isn't taught in a school, but one that is a part of you, so be proud of that." Uraraka smiles while Ida bows. "Thank you, All Might Sensei." All Might then looks at Bakugu. "As for you, young Bakugu." Bakugu flinches at his name. "I'm sure you understand why I'm not pleased with your actions." Bakugu looks away as tears prick at his eyes. "I told you not to use your gauntlet against young Midoriya, yet you did so anyway. So unfortunately, I will have to report this. I understand that sometimes tensions can run high, but when I say no, I mean no." All Might then looks at Midoriya, but every time he sees the cold, emotionless expression, guilt shoots through his core. He did this. However, he pushes it aside before says, "Young Midoriya." Izuku's eyes remain focused on All Might as he patiently waits. "I understand that you're quite powerful, but taking an attack like that was very dangerous. You could have gotten killed. I'm not upset with you, but I am worried. I know how fast you are, so I don't understand why you wouldn't dodge young Bakuga's attack." Izuku answers, "The reason why I didn't dodge was because I wanted to show him the difference between our powers." All the students feel a chill go up their spine from Izuku's answer. Izuku explains, "I knew Bakuga wouldn't stop until the match either ended or until I had knocked him unconscious. Bakuga's entire being is focused on his determination and drive of becoming a hero and winning. So I knew he wouldn't stop no matter how much damage I could have caused him. However, though his greatest strength may be his determination, that also means that it's his greatest weakness." All Might looks at Izuku curiously. Bakuga was confident in his quirk, weapons, and abilities. He wasn't going to give up just because I could dodge his attack or that I could hurt him more than he could hurt me. That's why I blocked rather than dodged the attack, because that blast was his trump card. So to see me so effortlessly block the attack with little to no damage done to myself, I thoroughly crushed his resolve without having to lay a finger on him." Everyone stares in shock of Izuku's explanation, mainly because none of them had thought about that. Even Yaoyorozu hadn't considered crushing the opponent's resolve in order to win the match. The thought of it was cruel to her. All Might, of course, thought similarly. The way Izuku had spoken was far too similar to how All for One would fight. To break a person's spirit so completely that they couldn't bring themselves to continue fighting anymore. Kirishima comments, "Dude, that's so unmanly." Izuku replies as he looks at Kirishima, "Whether or not if it's manly is besides the point. A villain will exploit any weakness they're given. A villain will take anyone hostage, man, woman, child, anyone. A villain won't hesitate to kill if backed into a corner. A villain won't hesitate to strike you down if you let them. When you defend, you don't let them cut you. When you protect someone, you don't let them die. And when you attack," Izuku's eyes suddenly seem sharper, "you kill. The villains won't show you any mercy. So it's only fair if you return the favor. Though that doesn't mean that murder is the answer. You must still be prepared to make the choice between the life of a villain and the life of a mother, father, or child." Though Izuku's words were cold and harsh, the class understood what he meant. Being a hero wasn't about fame and glory, but being prepared to make decisions they may not want to make in order to save and protect others. It's at that point that they realize that there may come a time when they might not have a choice, and it may cost someone's life, theirs or the victim's. It's at that moment that all the students nod as a new feeling of determination burns within them to become strong enough so that they don't have to make those choices. Izuku doesn't realize what exactly he's done to inspire his classmates to not only do better, but become the best of the best. The next few rounds of the battle trial go by surprisingly well, with everyone taking them seriously and actually getting into character. They come up with creative ways of trapping or stalling their opponents, as well as discover reasons as to why they might have become villains if they had chosen that path. Kirishima as a villain talks about how chivalry is dead, how people are only out for themselves, and how weak society has become. Yaoyorozu lays the entire building out with traps as she speaks through the speaker system of the building to offset the heroes. She talks down to her opponents about how society is so focused on using their quirks specifically for heroism that it isn't even considered for other jobs, as well as how society has treated those with weaker or different quirks. The heroes throughout the exercise take what the villains say and use it to drive themselves forward so that way they can create a better society rather than tear it down. Needless to say, the exercise was a resounding success, which surprised All Might with just how seriously the students took it and the reasons they came up with for becoming villains. Izuku expected a lot of things from being a student at UA. Being harassed by reporters was not one of them. As he's being bombarded by their questions about All Might, he asks, "Do none of you have anything better to do other than prey upon high school students?" The reporters flinch from his question before a brown-haired woman answers, "It's our job to report the truth and facts. The faculty won't let us in, so we're having to do the next best thing. If you can just give us some information on All Might, then we'll get out of your hair as quickly as possible." Izuku then asks rhetorically as he tilts his head to the side, while keeping his same emotionless expression, "Do you honestly expect me to believe that?" The way Izuku looks at the reporters unnerves them as he explains, "I know people like you. No means yes, and yes means do whatever you want. If I were to give you an inch, then you'll take a mile. If I answered one question about All Might, then you'll already be asking me two more. Neither the faculty, students, or myself have time to deal with your pointless questions." The reporters start to back away, but the brown-haired woman remains even though her legs are trembling. Izuku then states, "Besides, do you honestly think that UA and All Might should take time out of their busy schedules to answer every little question you have? In case if you haven't noticed, but the faculty are busy trying to run a school to train future heroes and teach future business leaders, as well as support engineers. Yet, you want them to put everything down just for you? I don't know if you're naive or arrogant with that kind of thought process." In either case, Izuku narrows his gaze back off. Izuku walks through the gates, not bothering to look back at the frightened reporters who are standing just a bit further away. Some of them even leave after what Izuku had said, although the more stubborn and determined ones were scared straight. After Izuku's talk with them, they don't press for answers from the students, but gratefully accept any answer they get even if it wasn't useful or insightful. Izuku and his classmates wait in homeroom for Aizawa to arrive. The students all chat amongst themselves over the exercise they had done the day before and how awesome it was. If Izuku hadn't done what he did during his exercise, they might have not taken it seriously and made plenty of mistakes. However, for them it's hard to approach someone who is so closed off like he is. Not that it's his fault that he lost his emotions, but how does someone just start a conversation with someone like that? Uraraka walks up to Izuku with a smile. "Hey Midoriya, yesterday's exercise was pretty cool, wasn't it?" Izuku looks at Uraraka, who's standing before his desk, before he nods, "Yeah, I guess so." Uraraka replies thoughtfully, "I wonder if that's how our classes will be throughout our entire high school career, or if it'll be like that only a few times." Izuku says, "I'd imagine that it wouldn't be like that constantly. I'm sure there'll be some parts of it that are more enjoyable than others." Kirishima chimes in, I know I said yesterday that what you did wasn't very manly, but I gotta say you'd make a really scary villain." Izuku looks over with a quirked eyebrow as he replies, "Thanks." Yaoyorozu says from her desk, "The way that you portrayed yourself and how you act regularly really gives off an overwhelming pressure. Not to mention your way of speaking definitely helps with shaking a person's resolve. It's as though you're talking about facts of life, which isn't too far off from what you actually talk about. It's just so amazing yet terrifying how you see things so much differently from the rest of us." Izuku replies as he looks at Yaoyorozu, "I'd say that comes with how I was treated before I got my quirk and lost my emotions. However, I'm still not quite sure if losing my emotions caused me to manifest my quirk or if manifesting my quirk caused me to lose my emotions." Ida comments as he hums thoughtfully with his hand on his chin, "Yes, that does sound peculiar." Ashido adds, "It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg?" Izuku looks at Ashido for a moment, which makes her nervous before he says, "I guess you're right. I never thought about it like that." Aizawa then walks in as soon as the bell rings. "All right, everyone, to your seats." Everyone quickly rushes to their seats before Aizawa stands in front of the class with a stack of papers. "Now then, we'll be going over the exercise you all had done yesterday, and I have to say, Aizawa lets the anticipation build in his students. I was impressed with most of you. The students let out a sigh of relief, however. That doesn't mean there aren't more things to improve on. So that's what we'll be going over this morning. Aizawa looks over Bakugu. Bakugu's back visibly straightens as his name is called out. I'm sure that by now you've realized just how reckless and dangerous what you did actually was. Had that have been a real mission, you could have gotten yourself and other people killed. But I also understand that Midoriya was able to get under your skin. However, most villains will try to do that, to get into your head and manipulate your thoughts and feelings. So next time, try to hold on to your drive and determination without going overboard, understand? Bakuga nods on understanding as he replies, yes, sir. Aizawa then says, Midoriya, while you did win in an obvious one-sided match, perhaps next time you should allow your teammate to show what they can do. Your strategy may have been foolproof, but the point of you and your fellow students being here is to learn, and they can't exactly do that if you're fighting their battles for them. Izuku nods as he replies, I understand. Throughout the rest of homeroom, Aizawa goes through each individual student while giving them a bit of praise and also letting them know what they could have done better. After it's over, he says, now that that's over, it's time to make a decision that may decide the rest of your high school career. The students wait nervously. You're going to have to choose your class representatives. Immediately, hands shoot into the air as they all start calling out to pick them for class president. Aizawa, however, says over the chatter, I don't care how you choose. Just come to a decision before the end of class. Izuku doesn't participate in shouting to become class president. Instead, he reads through his quirk analysis and makes corrections to them. Ida then shouts out above everyone else, enough. Ida continues, once all eyes are on him, it's obvious that we won't come to a decision like this. So I suggest that we vote. Azui then asks, but how do we know who to choose since we barely know each other? Kaminari adds, yeah, won't everybody just vote for themselves? Ida answers as he chops his hands, that's why whoever has earned the most votes will be the most deserving for the positions. We won't all vote for ourselves, otherwise we won't get anywhere, and shouting out our names won't do any good either. That's why this is the most quick and efficient way of choosing our representative. Jairu comments as she twirls her jacks, he makes a good point. Kirishima adds with a grin, yeah, I'm down with it. By the end of it, Yaoyorozu ends up as class president with Izuku as vice representative. Izuku thinks to himself, how did I become vice president? Aizawa says beside Yaoyorozu and Izuku, all right. Yaoyorozu will be your class president and Midoriya will be your vice president. Yaoyorozu bows, thank you for putting your faith and trust in me. I won't let you down. Izuku then bows after her without saying anything. After class, Yaoyorozu walks towards Izuku feeling nervous, so it seems we'll be working together from now on. Izuku replies with a nod as he looks at her, so it would seem. Yaoyorozu comments, I know we haven't really talked much, but I hope that we're able to make this a great partnership. Izuku looks at Yaoyorozu in confusion before she explains somewhat nervously, you see, before I thought you were kind of scary. Even now I'm kind of intimidated. But in order to be the best class president, I can be you and I need to work together. Which means that I have to overcome my fears no matter how small they may be. Izuku replies, if speaking to me is so difficult, then I can just hand the position to someone else. Yaoyorozu waves her hands as she tries to backtrack. No, I don't mean it like that. I mean, I still want to talk with you and get to know you as a classmate. It's just your demeanor is sort of off-putting. Not that I mean any offense to that. It's just how I feel. Izuku says, I understand. Izuku extends his hand, which catches Yaoyorozu by surprise. I look forward to working with you. If you ever need something, let me know. Suddenly, all the tension Yaoyorozu had before speaking to Izuku disappears before she shakes his hand with a smile likewise. As Yaoyorozu walks back to her desk, she can't help but wonder why she was so afraid of Izuku. He hadn't done or said anything threatening, yet for some reason she was afraid of him, as if one wrong move could destroy her. However, as she looks back at Izuku's form sitting at his desk, she recalls what he had said during the apprehension test. Seeing Izuku sitting there writing in his notebook, she thinks to herself with a sad expression, it must have been so hard and lonely for him before. During lunch, Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, and Jairu all sat with Izuku. Uraraka comments, congratulations on becoming class president, Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu nods with a graceful smile. Thank you, Uraraka. I hope that I'm able to live up to everyone's expectations. Izuku adds with his eyes focused on his food, you will. Your analysis of yesterday's fight was impressive to say the least. Being so detailed-oriented will definitely help with being class president. Uraraka says with a bright smile as she pats Izuku on the back. Yeah, plus I'm sure Midoriya here will help you if you ever need it. Jiru then says, by the way, something's been bothering me since our first day. Uraraka and Yaoyorozu look at Jiru as she looks at Izuku. Your quirk seems to be an enhancement type, yet for some reason you can shoot out bursts of energy. Izuku looks up before he swallows his food to answer. It's actually an energy-based quirk that enhances everything about me. The energy that I possess allows me to move at incredible speeds, grant me enormous strength, enhance my perception, as well as significantly increase my durability, as well as allow me to have high-speed regeneration. Even though I haven't had my quirk for very long, I've learned a lot about it, likely due to the fact that quirks of themselves have always been fascinating to me. Jiru then asks curiously, how much power did you use during the ball throw test? Uraraka and Yaoyorozu look at Izuku also with curiosity before he answers 25%. The three girls yell out in unison, what? Their outburst draws attention, but none of them realize it as Jiru asks that was only 25%. Izuku nods before he says, if I were to try to use any more, then I would be forced to use my first transformation. Yaoyorozu asks as all the girls sit down and some people nearby listen in transformation. Izuku nods as he explains 25% is the most I can do in my base form, 50% is what I can do in my first form, and my second form is when I use 100%. When I was experimenting with my quirk a few months ago, I actually had to leave Japan in order to actually test it. I had to go to an isolated island thanks to the quirk specialist's request for testing. No one has actually seen my second form due to it being too dangerous. The data that the quirk specialist got was from my own observations. Uraraka then asks, do you think it's possible to go into your second form without it being so destructive? Izuku answers as he looks at her, I technically can, but being at 100% essentially means that any move I make could prove fatal to those around me. I could go into my second form without ever actually doing anything, but that would be pointless. Jiru asks, are there any drawbacks to these transformations? Izuku thinks for a moment before he answers, none that I can think of, but I've never been in combat with anyone while in that form to truly know the full extent of it. However, considering how powerful I am in my base and first form, I doubt I'll ever find someone who could challenge me aside from All Might. As soon as Izuku is finished speaking, the alarm system goes off, sending the students into a panic. Uraraka asks, what's that? What's going on? A third year who's passing by answers, it's a level 3 alarm. That means someone has broken in on campus. As they all go to get up, they see how congested the hallway is with all the students pushing and shoving in a panic. Izuku comments, we need to get their attention and calm them down. If this continues any further, then someone is going to get hurt. Yaoyorozu then gets an idea as she says, looking at Uraraka, I want you and Jiru to cover me while I create something. Uraraka and Jiru both nod as they follow after Yaoyorozu while Izuku stands guard. Yaoyorozu undoes her shirt facing a wall, while Uraraka and Jiru both look outwards while blocking anyone's view of her. Yaoyorozu creates a loudspeaker before she buttons up her shirt and walks towards the students in the hallway. Everyone calm down. The students all turn to look at Yaoyorozu. We are UA students. This is no time to panic. I want everyone to evacuate in an orderly fashion. If you see anyone who's injured, please help them to safety until Recovery Girl arrives. The students begin to evacuate in a calm manner before Yaoyorozu lowers the loudspeaker with a sigh. Izuku comments, looks like we know who broke in. The girls all look to Izuku, who is pointing outside the window to reveal the press that tried to interview them from earlier that morning. Jiru asks incredulously, really? Do these guys not have anything better to do than hound UA about All Might? Uraraka replies, apparently not. It didn't take long before the press was escorted off the premises with a warning from UA. It was the 4th day of UA. The students had a pretty good idea as to how most days would play out. General studies at the beginning of the day and hero studies towards the end. Izuku theorizes that it was done this way so that the students weren't exhausted during their general studies classes, which made sense. During the last class of the day, Aizawa says at the front of the class, all right everyone, today we'll be going to a facility for you all to train at. You can wear either your hero costume or your gym uniform. The bus leaves in 15 minutes, so get moving. The students all rush to grab their cases and get changed. Izuku takes out his repaired costume, which now has the addition to being made out of more durable material as well as being flame retardant. As they sit on the bus, most of the students are chatting amongst themselves while Izuku has his eyes closed, not interacting with anyone until Midoriya. Izuku cracks open an eye as he looks to his left to see Azui, who's sitting beside him. I tend to say whatever is on my mind. Izuku wonders why she felt the need to say that before she says your quirk reminds me a lot of All Might's. The entire bus goes silent as they listen to their conversation. Izuku replies, I can see how you could interpret that since both of us have super strength and super speed. But as far as pure strength goes, All Might has me beat. However, I think we'd be evenly matched in terms of speed, but my power is far more deadly than his, and any kind of attack he lands on me, I'll either be able to withstand or regenerate from. Kaminari asks incredulously, did you just imply that you could beat All Might? Izuku answers as he looks at Kaminari, I can neither confirm or deny that I could beat All Might. Both because we haven't fought each other and we haven't seen him use his full strength. Kirishima comments thoughtfully honestly. I can kind of see how you two could be evenly matched. Everyone looks at Kirishima. I mean, we all saw what he did on our first day, and I can't imagine anyone other than All Might doing that. Ashido replies, Kiri's got a point. Kaminari adds, yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine All Might losing to anyone either. Izuku counters, All Might is just as human as anyone else, and has weaknesses just the same, whereas my only major weakness would only serve to change my goal entirely. Azui asks as she looks at Izuku, what do you mean change your goal? Izuku answers as he looks at her, my moral compass is purely based on my weakness. If someone were to try to use that weakness or try to exploit it, then I'll do whatever it takes to protect it, no matter how brutal or cruel I have to be. Ida states as he chops his arms, that's no way for a hero to act. Izuku counters as he looks at Ida, maybe so, but if someone takes my weakness, then I won't be a hero anymore. Uraraka asks curiously, what is your weakness, Midoriya? Izuku looks at Uraraka for a moment, contemplating whether if he should answer or not before he finally decides, my mom. Everyone looks at Izuku in surprise as he explains, she was always there for me growing up. She was the only one who cared about me, and even though she didn't think I could become a hero, she still did everything in her power to make sure I was happy and healthy, even if I was hiding my pain and despair from her. She's my moral compass. She's one of the only reasons why I'm still trying to be a hero despite how this society has treated me. She's the only thing I have left, and I won't hesitate to destroy anyone who tries to take her from me. Izuku's classmates look at him with sympathy. Even though what Izuku said was mildly scary, they still understood. If someone hurt their moms, they'd probably do the same thing. Aizawa stands up as he says, we're here. The students all step off the bus before they walk into the dome-looking facility. Inside, they see 13. Uraraka bounces on the heels of her feet excitedly as she says, I can't believe 13's here. She's so cool. Izuku is reminded of how he used to be before he got his quirk when he'd see a new hero or quirk. 13 spreads out her arms as she says, welcome students to my rescue training facility. This entire building was made by my own design. We have the flood zone, the conflagration zone, rock slide zone, and downpour zone, just to name a few. Today we'll be teaching you all how to properly use your quirks in order to protect and rescue civilians. I call this facility the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or USJ for short. The students all think to themselves, it's like Universal Studio of Japan. 13 then says as she raises her index finger, however, there's a point that I'd like to make before we begin. All the students listen intently to 13 as you well know my quirk. Black hole can help with removing rubble or other debris in order to rescue people. Uraraka nods excitedly, however. My quirk can also just as easily be used to hurt if used improperly. That is why I want all of you to think about your quirks when going through these simulations so as to gain a better perspective on your quirks and what it means to be a hero. 13 bows as she says, thank you for listening. Aizawa then walks up to 13 as they talk in hushed voices, wasn't All Might supposed to be here? 13 answers as she raises 3 fingers, yes. But unfortunately, he seemed to have used up his 3 hours earlier this morning. Aizawa sighs in frustration before he comments that man is the height of irrationality. Aizawa then turns towards the students, all right everyone, I hope you're all ready because... Aizawa suddenly feels the air shift before he turns around to see a purple mist in front of the water fountain as the lights flicker off. The mist then expands as a large group of people exit through the portal. Kirishima asks as he steps forward what's going on. Aizawa holds out his arm as he yells, "Stay back. Those are villains." Hagakure asks worriedly, "Wait, villains? How did they get in here?" Aizawa looks at Kaminari. "See if you can try and get in contact with the school. 13 evacuate the students and call for assistance." Before Aizawa can jump down the stairs to fight the villains, a hand grabs him by the arm. Aizawa looks back to see Izuku looking at him. "Your specialty is sneak attacks? You can't possibly take this many villains on all at once." Aizawa replies as he fails to pull out of Izuku's grasp, "You can't be a hero if you're a one-trick pony." Izuku counters, "If you go down there by yourself, there's no guarantee you'll make it out alive." Aizawa explains it's a hero's job to risk their lives to protect others. Izuku replies, "Risking your life unnecessarily isn't the job of a hero." Aizawa looks at Izuku questioningly before Izuku explains that Mist Villain warped all those villains in here. If he manages to warp the students away, then that will put them in great danger. You're the only one who can prevent the students from being scattered. That's why you and 13 need to evacuate the students before the villains get up here. Aizawa replies with a scowl, "The villains will just follow us then." Izuku then says, "That's why I'll take them on." Aizawa's eyes widen in surprise before he looks at Izuku in frustration. "I'm not letting you go down there and face all those villains by yourself. You're just a kid and MY student." Izuku counters, "It's the only option we've got. I'm the only one who has the chance of taking them all on, and we need to minimize the risk of the rest of the students as much as possible." Aizawa yells, "I'm not letting you risk your life just to end up getting yourself hurt, if not killed." Izuku then rhetorically asks in a dark tone, "What is one life compared to 18 others?" Aizawa looks at Izuku as if he had just been slapped in the face before Izuku lets him go and walks past him. "Take the students and leave. Call the police and some backup. I'm sure we'll have plenty of arrests on our hands." Aizawa watches Izuku descend down the stairs as he clenches his fists in frustration before looking at 1313. "We need to evacuate the students now." Yaoyorozu then asks worriedly, "What about Midoriya?" Uraraka adds with a worried expression, "We can't just leave him here." Aizawa replies as he looks at them, "We'll just have to put our faith in him." The villains all see Izuku calmly walk down the stairs with his hands in his pockets as his footsteps echo throughout the facility. A lot of the villains grin maliciously as they think Izuku's just an arrogant brat, while a few of them suddenly feel an underlying amount of fear well within them. They know that there's something not right about Izuku with the way he's calmly walking down the stairs, as well as the emotionless expression he has. Just before Izuku reaches ground level, he asks as he looks at the sea of villains, "May I ask what you're all doing here?" One of the villains answers, "We're here to put an end to the symbol of peace." Izuku looks at the villain from a few steps above them with an uninterested expression as he asks, "Is that so?" Izuku then says, "Unfortunately, All Might isn't here right now, so I guess I'll be the one you'll be entertaining today." The villain's grins turn into angry growls as one of them says big words from a UA brat. "Think you can back it up?" Izuku counters as he looks at the villain who just spoke, "Why should I be intimidated by a bunch of trash?" Izuku's response causes a few villains with gun-like quirks to aim their barrels towards him before shooting. However, Izuku is able to see every bullet flying towards him and proceeds to catch each one that comes towards him. Once the villains are done shooting, they stare at Izuku in shock as Izuku holds out fistfuls of bullets before dropping them to the floor. Izuku then says, "My turn." Izuku uses Sonido to suddenly appear in front of the villain directly in front of him before punching him in the gut so hard that it sends him crashing into the villains behind him. He then looks to his left where the second villain who shot at him is staring in shell shock before he appears in front of her and kicks her in the stomach, sending her flying into a tree. The last villain who shot at Izuku raises his barrel again to take a shot at Izuku before he suddenly disappears from his sight. Izuku appears in the air behind him before delivering an axe kick to his shoulder, completely breaking it, while sending him crashing face first into the concrete. Izuku looks down at the villain he just kicked before looking towards the rest of the villains before he asks who's next. The few smarter villains take that as their warning to stand down, while the other villains charge forth with their quirks and fists at the ready, only to be taken down each with a single attack. Those who haven't attacked yet soon realize just how strong Izuku is and begin to feel their legs tremble in fear. Aizawa leads the students towards the exit while 13 covers the rear when the warp villain suddenly appears before them. Aizawa holds out his arms, signaling the students to stop. The villain states in a formal tone apologies for trespassing onto this property of heroes. However, we were under the impression that All Might would be here, so as to finally rid the world of the symbol of peace once and for all. But it seems as though he isn't here at the moment. None of you would happen to know where he might be, would you? Aizawa asks as he grasps his capture gear. You don't honestly think you could beat All Might even with the number of thugs you've brought, can you? The villain answers those thugs are merely there to keep the heroes busy, but it seems as though you've decided to run while a child does your job for you. Kirishima counters with a glare. Midoriya was the one who figured out that you would come here and try to scatter us across the facility, leaving us unprotected. The villain hums, I see. That child is quite impressive if it took him only a few seconds to figure out our plan. However, it makes no difference. You'll all be scattered in the wind soon enough. As the villain's form begins to grow, Aizawa uses his quirk to prevent his students from being warped away before using his capture weapon to bind the villain. Aizawa orders 13, get the students out of here now. I'll hold them off. 13 nods in understanding as she says everyone run towards the exit. Don't stop for anything. The students all do as 13 says before they run past Aizawa and the villain. The villain comments, so, you're Eraserhead then? I've heard quite a bit about you. However, there's no way you could hold this up for long. Once all the students have left the facility, Aizawa allows himself a chance to blink, but when he opens his eyes, the villain is gone. Aizawa grits his teeth. Damn it, he got away. A villain with a mutation quirk punches Izuku in the face, who doesn't flinch or show any signs of pain before he asks, is that all? Izuku then delivers a punch to the villain's stomach, which sends him sprawling across the floor in pain. The villains are finally starting to realize just how outmatched they are. The warp villain appears beside the ring leader before the leader asks, so, were you able to take care of them, Kurogiri? Kurogiri answers, I'm sorry, Shigaraki, but unfortunately the students managed to escape. They had Eraserhead with them. Shigaraki scratches at his neck before he asks irritably, were you at least able to find out where All Might is? Kurogiri replies, I asked, but did not receive an answer. It seems as though he isn't here right now. Shigaraki growls in frustration due to his plan flopping before it even got started. Before he finally sighs, oh well, the least we can do is take care of the mini-boss while we're here. Shigaraki notices how the remaining villains are hesitating to attack Izuku, who simply stares at Shigaraki before Shigaraki yells out, why are you hesitating? He's just one brat. One of the villains counters, this brat just took out half of our guys without even breaking a sweat. Shigaraki growls in frustration before Izuku interjects, it's not their fault that your plan has failed so pathetically. Your plan was weak to begin with. You had shown that you had someone with a warp quirk from the very beginning, which made it easy to guess that you would try to scatter the students across the facility while the heroes were distracted fighting the villains here. However, if the heroes had decided to evacuate the students rather than fight the villains first, then your plan would have failed without me interfering. Besides, how can anyone follow a leader who's sitting behind them relaxing? The remaining villains look at Shigaraki, who hasn't moved since he arrived. Before Shigaraki counters, a strategist works best from afar. Izuku replies with a tilt of his head, perhaps, but you clearly aren't a strategist if it is so easy to foil your plan or even have a backup plan for when your first plan fails. Which means you aren't a strategist and are just an arrogant insect trying to face down a predator you can't possibly overpower. Shigaraki grits his teeth in anger before he gets an idea. Shigaraki acts calm as he says, you heroes are all the same. All you do is try to solve violence with more violence. Why is it that when a villain does it, it's considered evil, but when heroes do it, it's considered heroic? Heroes are nothing more than glorified attack dogs. Izuku says you're not entirely wrong. Shigaraki is surprised by Izuku's response before he counters, however. The reason heroes get violent is because there usually isn't any other way to subdue the villains. Izuku then asks as he narrows his eyes at Shigaraki, if I were to ask you to turn yourselves over without fighting, would you do it? Shigaraki grits his teeth as he clenches his fists in frustration. No, you wouldn't, because you don't gain anything from it. While it is fair to say that some heroes should be less violent, the fact remains that in order to subdue villains they have to fight. It's violence out of necessity to keep the peace. Shigaraki growls before he starts scratching at his neck. Damn it. Izuku then comments as his eyes seem to sharpen. My eyes see everything. There's nothing you can hide from me. Your attempt at making it seem as though you have some moral high ground failed long before the conversation even started. If your goal was to kill All Might, why attack UA? A school filled with children. Clearly you don't care about who you hurt or what happens to them. However, Izuku's gaze shifts to Kurogiri. I also know that you're all nothing more than puppets for your master. Shigaraki stops scratching his neck as his and Kurogiri's eyes widen in shock. Izuku then states as he gestures to the fallen villains, it's obvious that someone with so little charisma couldn't have possibly amassed this many followers. Which means someone else is behind you pulling the strings. Whoever they are must have wealth, knowledge, or power in order to convince these ants to consider killing a hero like All Might. Kurogiri stares at Izuku as he starts to feel fear creeping up his body as he thinks this child. Just who is he? Do his eyes really see everything? Shigaraki commands as he points at Izuku. Nomu, kill this brat now. Nomu disappears before reappearing behind Izuku ready to bring down his fist, but Izuku is able to block the incoming fist with the palm of his hand as he turns to face the Nomu. The attack sends out a shockwave as Izuku's arm starts to tremble from the amount of pressure the Nomu is exerting on him. Izuku comments, I'm impressed. I may actually have to use both hands to beat you. The remaining villains just look at Izuku in abject horror from the fact that he managed to not only withstand an attack from Nomu, but block it completely with one hand. The Nomu raises its other fist in preparation to attack, but Izuku uses Sonido to appear behind it and kick it in the side, sending the Nomu skidding across the concrete. Shigaraki's eyes widen in shock. He actually managed to push Nomu back? Izuku says to himself, so you have super strength, super speed, and shock absorption. I think I understand why it is that you follow orders from someone who is clearly weaker than you. The Nomu rushes towards Izuku again, but Izuku simply takes a step back, dodging the Nomu's punch as it's buried into the ground. You don't actually have a mind of your own, do you? The Nomu's empty gaze locks onto Izuku before it pulls out its fist. Izuku then comments, I wonder which of us will win, the mindless monster or the heartless monster. Nomu and Izuku continue to fight against each other, with Izuku either dodging or blocking Nomu's attacks before countering with his own, which the Nomu tanks. Their blows send out gusts of wind and shockwaves, which forces the remaining villains to either find cover or stay on the ground with their hands over their heads. Eventually, Izuku decides enough. When Izuku blocks one of the Nomu's attacks with his left hand, he points his right index finger at the Nomu's arm at an upward angle 0. A giant burst of energy shoots from Izuku's finger, completely destroying the Nomu's arm. One of the villains asks in complete fear, what the hell was that? Even Shigaraki is surprised by the blast and at how Izuku has managed to hold his own against Nomu. However, what really shocks them to their core isn't the fact that Izuku managed to completely destroy Nomu's arm, but the amount of damage it did to the roof of the USJ with the giant gaping hole. One thought crosses all their minds: this kid could have killed us all in one shot if he wanted to. The Nomu tries to attack Izuku again, but he jumps away to gain some distance. It's over. You can't beat me. Shortly after Izuku says this, the Nomu's arm regenerates, which causes Izuku's eyes to widen slightly in mild surprise. Shigaraki asks hesitantly, did you really think super strength, speed, and shock absorption were Nomu's only quirks? Izuku looks at Shigaraki from the corner of his eyes, noticing the trembling of his legs. You say that as though it makes a difference. The Nomu takes this moment to attack Izuku again, but as Nomu goes to attack, Izuku uses Sonido to appear in front of him before kicking him into the air. Izuku then appears in the air beside Nomu as it reaches the peak of its height, before Izuku kicks him again to the side. Finally, Izuku appears above the Nomu before he delivers an axe kick to the Nomu's back, causing the Nomu to fall on the fountain with the metal pipe piercing through its abdomen. Blood starts coming out of the fountain as the Nomu struggles to free itself. Izuku then looks at Shigaraki as he lands a few feet away from him before Izuku says with finality, it's over. Shigaraki stares at Izuku, completely overtaken with fear as he thinks this kid didn't just beat Nomu, he completely overpowered him. Something that Master created to beat All Might. Nomu had all the quirks needed to kill him, and yet this brat took him down like it was nothing. Shigaraki thinks about Izuku's Zero. This kid could have killed us no problem, yet he decided to take them all down individually. He doesn't even see us as a threat. What the fuck kind of monster is he? As Shigaraki starts hyperventilating, Izuku says as he faces him, surrender now. It's obvious you can't win. Kirojiri uses his quirk to reach Shigaraki, but as soon as his mist moves, Izuku points his left index finger at him, as time seems to slow with Izuku charging his Zero to attack. However, Kirojiri manages to reach Shigaraki and warp away. Izuku lets go of the Zero, making it disappear before he hears a loud bang throughout the building. Never fear, because I am here. Izuku looks up to see All Might at the top of the stairs, who only just notices the number of fallen villains and the Nomu who's impaled by the fountain. All Might's eyes widen in shock and horror at the sight, but what disturbs him most is Izuku's vacant expression to the scene he's in. Shigaraki falls through the warp gate into a bar with Kirojiri standing behind him. A TV with audio only asks calmly what happened. Kirojiri answers as Shigaraki is still trying to gain his bearings. We were completely overpowered and outmatched, Sensei. Sensei replies after a thoughtful hum, I see. So it seems All Might hasn't lost as much power as I thought. Shigaraki counters with a shake of his head, no Sensei. All Might wasn't even there. It was some monster. Sensei asks curiously, a monster you say? Kirojiri explains the child managed to defeat every villain we brought, aside from the ones who eventually surrendered. The child possesses great speed, strength, and endurance, along with who knows what other kind of enhancements. However, he also had the ability to shoot out blasts of energy that could have killed all of us in one shot if he wanted to. Sensei is thoroughly intrigued. He'd never heard of a quirk that powerful, I see. It appears there's another piece on the playing board. Shigaraki then adds, this time more calmly, that's not all, Sensei. There was something wrong with him. Throughout the whole fight, he didn't show any signs of emotion. The way he carried himself and the way he spoke almost seemed as though he wasn't even human. Like he was some sort of monster. I remember him saying when he was fighting the Nomu, I wonder which of us will win, the mindless monster or the heartless monster. Sensei remains silent for a moment before he says it would seem that from that statement that he managed to deduce that the Nomu had no will of its own. He must have quite an impressive intellect for him to reach such a conclusion. But what really interests me is the implication of what he said. Shigaraki and Kirojiri both look at the monitor. If he truly has no heart, then theoretically he should have no allegiance to the heroes, unless he has someone who's guiding him. Shigaraki's eyes widen in realization, which means if we're able to find this person, then we can control him. Sensei replies, please correct Tamura. However, before we do anything, we must gather more information on this heartless monster of yours. Once we know who he is, then we may be able to find who it is that's guiding him, and from there we can force him onto our side. Shigaraki grins maniacally as he says, yes, Sensei. Meanwhile, Izuku says as he stares up at All Might as all the villains lie on the ground around him, you're late, All Might. A chill runs up All Might's spine at the sight. He sees the boy he failed to save almost a year ago standing among the bodies of many villains, with one of them impaled on a fountain with blood pouring out of it. Bile rises up in All Might's throat, but he swallows it back down before he jumps down the stairs to meet Izuku. All Might asks, standing before Izuku, young Midoriya, what happened here? Izuku answers as he turns fully towards All Might, these villains managed to infiltrate the USJ through a villain with a warp quirk known as Kirojiri. Apparently, they were following someone by the name of Shigaraki, and they were planning on using a biologically engineered monster in order to kill you called Nomu. Izuku gestures to the Nomu, which is still impaled, but the bleeding has stopped due to the Nomu's regeneration. Izuku continues, Aizawa had wanted to fight the villains himself, but I told him just how irrational an idea like that would be since I'm stronger, faster, and far more powerful than him. I managed to take most of the villains down while using roughly 5%, but I actually had to use 25% in order to subdue the Nomu. Don't worry, he's not dead. He has a regeneration quirk, so he should still be alive, if you can even call it being alive. All Might asks, disturbed, what do you mean? Izuku answers as he gazes into All Might's eyes, the Nomu has no mind or will of its own. It only follows orders. I would assume that it's because of the process it had to go through in order to gain its other quirks. All Might's heart stops as his eyes widen other quirks. Izuku explains from what I've discovered. The Nomu has super strength, super speed, regeneration, and shock absorption. The reason why I know these are all separate quirks instead of just one singular quirk like my own is because Shigaraki had mentioned during my fight with it that strength, speed, and shock absorption weren't its only quirks. Honestly, I believe you could beat it if you hadn't wasted all of your time beforehand. But even then, you'd still have trouble with it considering how your wound must be affecting you. All Might grits his teeth in frustration as he puts his hand over his old wound. After all, Izuku is right. All Might had wasted all of his time earlier that morning, and because of that he wasn't at the USJ when the villains attacked. Not only that, but over time All Might hasn't just been losing time on his limit. He's also becoming weaker, likely due to the wound and how he has pushed himself. Izuku walks past All Might as he says, I should get back to my classmates. I'll let you take over from here. All Might's frustration spikes as Izuku had basically just told him to just clean up the mess. All Might thinks to himself, young Midoriya fought all of these villains with ease and managed to defeat a monster even I would have trouble with. All Might recalls what Aizawa had told him over the phone: they were after me, and I wasn't here to protect them. How could I be so stupid and careless? How many times am I going to fail? Izuku walks out of the USJ with his eyes closed and his hands in his pockets before he hears Uraraka call out as she runs towards him from the bus. Midoriya. Izuku opens his eyes as Uraraka immediately hugs him to his surprise before she asks with a worried expression as she pulls away, are you alright? Izuku replies, still somewhat surprised from Uraraka's question. She knows how strong he is and what he's capable of, yet she's still worried about him. I'm fine. Uraraka looks over Izuku's form, not believing him, before she finally relaxes, letting out a breath. Thank goodness. When we saw you shoot off your Zero, we got worried that maybe you had gotten overwhelmed. Most of us wanted to go help you and make sure you were okay, but Aizawa stopped us, saying we would just get in the way. More of their classmates rush off the bus to check on Izuku. Izuku goes to answer, but then he thinks that his immediate response would be too cold. Izuku thinks it would be pretty arrogant and condescending of me to say that Aizawa was right. I should probably say something else. Izuku replies with a nod, thank you for your concern. Fortunately, I had it all under control. I didn't have to use more than 25% of my power. Kaminari comments as he and the rest of the class group up around Izuku. You mean that was only 25%? Izuku looks at Kaminari before he says, that's right. But I only had to go that far against the villain that was made to kill All Might. The students all cry out in shock. You beat the villain that was supposed to kill All Might? Izuku says simply, I may have had to use a little more if I didn't find a way to subdue the villain. Fortunately, I was able to do so. Aizawa asks as he walks towards Izuku, and hearing what he had said so far, what did you do to him? Izuku answers as he looks vaguely, I didn't cause any irreparable damage to him. I simply incapacitated him. Aizawa's eyes narrow as he understands that Izuku had dodged his question. It doesn't take long for him to realize that Izuku is only doing so because of his classmates' presence. However, Todoroki seems to think that Izuku may have done something that would get him in trouble, but doesn't say anything. Once the teachers and police arrive, they start taking their statements. It doesn't take the detective long to reach Izuku, since Aizawa and 13 statements were so short. Detective Tsukachi stands before Izuku with a notepad, and Aizawa standing beside him away from everyone else. Now then, your name's Izuku Midoriya, correct? Izuku answers with a nod, that's right. Tsukachi then asks, would you care to explain exactly what happened? Izuku explains while looking at Tsukachi, once I felt the static in the air, I realized something was wrong. Not too long after that the lights went out. Then I managed to catch sight of the warp gate that the warp villain, Kirojiri, opened to let all the other villains into the USJ. Once I realized what type of quirk he had, it didn't take long for me to realize what they were going to use that villain for, which in my opinion would have been to scatter the students across the facility. Tsukachi then asks suspiciously, what do you mean in your opinion? Izuku answers, considering Eraserhead was going to jump headfirst into danger, it wouldn't take long for him to break eye contact, which the villain would use to warp to where the students and 13 were. 13 isn't a combat-oriented hero, and her quirk is extremely dangerous, which would make her reluctant to use it against another person even if they are a villain. Kirojiri could have used that hesitation to go through with their plan, or if 13 did decide to attack, Kirojari could have just used his quirk to reverse 13's quirk onto herself, after which he would have scattered the students just as they had planned, putting them all in danger. Aizawa and Sakachi's eyes widen in shock at Izuku's analysis of the situation before he continues. Once I realized what their plan was, I advised Eraserhead to evacuate the rest of the students and allow me to take care of the villains. Sukachi asks, why do you think you'd be more capable than a pro hero? Izuku answers as he tilts his head because, as I said before, 13 isn't combat-oriented, and Eraserhead would eventually have been defeated if not killed had I not gone in his stead. My quirk is energy-based and as a side effect enhances everything about me: my strength, speed, perception, durability, regeneration, everything. I can also use the energy from my quirk in order to fire off 2 different types of energy attacks: Zero, which is what I used against the villain that was meant to kill All Might, which also created that hole in the USJ, and Bala, which is more of a touch-based energy attack that uses less energy but still very lethal if used against a person. Aizawa asks angrily, you used your Zero against someone. Izuku replies as he looks at Aizawa, I didn't kill him, or rather it. In fact, I don't even believe it is human anymore, if it ever was one. Sukachi asks worriedly, what do you mean by that? Izuku looks back at Sukachi as he explains the monster called Nomu was biologically engineered to kill All Might. It has strength enhancement, speed enhancement, shock absorption, and regeneration quirks. As you've probably already realized, its quirks aren't too dissimilar from my own, if significantly weaker. Sukachi and Aizawa's eyes go wide as they realize just how powerful Izuku actually is before he continues, I only used Zero as a last resort and an intimidation tactic at the time, plus I only used it against the Noma's arm rather than anywhere that might be lethal. Once I realized it could regenerate, defeating it wasn't a problem since I wouldn't have to worry about it bleeding out. Sukachi and Aizawa's stomachs drop in horror of what Izuku had said, but he doesn't realize it as he finishes after that. I immobilized the Nomu by impaling it on the fountain in the center of the USJ. I did this to prevent the Nomu from fighting anymore and to thoroughly crush any hopes the villains had of winning. I did what was necessary to end the fight quickly and efficiently. Had I not done so, I would have been forced to kill it. Sukachi and Aizawa just stare at Izuku, unsure of what to say or do. Aizawa was a man of logic, but at that moment they both knew that Izuku was a monster of logic. Aizawa wonders for a moment, is this what it's like to lose all of your emotions? To simply not care about what you do or what happens as long as the end meets the desired result. Aizawa recalls how his students had surrounded Izuku when he came out of the USJ before an idea pops in his head. I wonder if it's possible to bring Midoriya's emotions back. Sukachi, on the other hand, is seriously considering arresting Izuku, but he worries over how Izuku would react. From Izuku's explanation, it's clear to Sukachi that Izuku believes that the ends justify the means. So if he were to try to arrest him, what would Izuku do? Would he understand that what he had done was wrong, or would he lash out and kill anyone who got in his way? Eventually, Sukachi decides to speak with Nezu about it. Clearly, Izuku isn't fit for the hero course and should be placed in a mental institution for his lack of empathy and cruelty. Izuku then says, however, this brings Aizawa and Sukachi out of their thoughts, the one who was giving orders to the rest of the villains. Shigaraki is not the real leader of the League of Villains. Sukachi asks hesitantly, what do you mean? Izuku answers Shigaraki was acting childish throughout the fight, yelling at his subordinates and throwing tantrums when things didn't go his way. He even tried to pretend as though he had some moral or just reason for being a villain by saying that heroes are just as violent as villains, yet the two are treated differently. Both Aizawa and Sukachi perk with interest of what Izuku's response might have been. I, of course, told him that such an idea was childish and naive. Heroes are only violent as a reaction to the villain's violence. Granted, some heroes could do with holding back, but it is necessary to preserve the peace. I even called him out on his attempt by asking him if he or the rest of his league would have surrendered if I had simply asked. Of course they wouldn't. They wouldn't gain anything from that. So, when reasoning fails, the only other option is to fight to protect those who can't protect themselves. Though it may not be heroic, students who are learning to become heroes should be taught how to use intimidation in order to prevent the villains from escaping or continuing on their crime. Aizawa and Tsukachi both stare at Izuku in surprise before they realize that from Izuku's explanation, he didn't attack to cause major harm unless absolutely necessary. Izuku had attacked to incapacitate and to intimidate the villains around him in order to prevent them from fighting him. From what Tsukachi had gathered from the medics before he went to interview Izuku, most of the villains weren't in any serious danger except for one whose face was almost completely broken from being smashed into the concrete. But even then, they'd be able to recover with a healing quirk. Aside from the Nomu, Izuku's attacks seemed almost harmless compared to what he could have done. Izuku could have just killed them all with a single Zero and been done with it. But he didn't. He incapacitated every villain who attacked him and intimidated the rest. Tsukachi thinks to himself, maybe this kid isn't too far gone. He then asks, you said before that you didn't think Shigaraki was the leader. Do you know who would be? Izuku answers thoughtfully, whoever is behind the league clearly has charisma and power in order to bring in so many villains, even if they are low-rate thugs. Plus, they would have to be knowledgeable in biology in order to create something like Nomu. So perhaps they may be a doctor or have a doctor on hand to do that for them. Not to mention that someone who has that kind of pull must also have wealth as well. So whoever it is that's pulling the strings is a very dangerous enemy that shouldn't be taken lightly. Tsukachi's eyes widen in horror as he can think of only one person who matches that description. It can't be. He's supposed to be dead. How is he still alive? Izuku then asks, are you alright, detective? Tsukachi blinks as he looks at Izuku. Truthfully, Izuku doesn't care about Tsukachi or how he's feeling, but that's what his old self would have asked if in that situation. Tsukachi replies with a fake smile, I'm fine, Midoriya. Izuku immediately picks up on the lie, but says nothing. Thank you for everything you've given me. This information will really help with our investigation. Izuku nods as he replies, you're welcome, detective. As Tsukachi leaves, Izuku comments, I thought he was actually going to arrest me just then. Aizawa looks at Izuku before he asks, curiously, what would you have done if he did? Izuku answers, honestly, as I am now, I would have gone along with him and accept whatever punishment the law deemed fit. Aizawa is impressed before Izuku says, however, the only reason why I would do that is solely because resisting would end up causing my mom pain, and even though I don't feel anything anymore, I know I never want to do that. Aizawa thinks to himself, this kid's only weakness really is his mom. I'd hate to see what he would do if she were ever put in any danger. However, perhaps there's still a little bit of emotion left in there buried deep beneath all his pain and despair. Aizawa ruffles Izuku's hair much to his surprise before Aizawa says, come on, kid, the others are waiting for you. Izuku runs his fingers through his hair as he wonders what was that. Even though no one was harmed during the USJ attack, Nedzu still decided to shut the school down in order to put in more security protocols as well as help with the investigation. When Izuku got home, Inko had practically smothered him with her worry, which he tried to dissuade by telling her that he wasn't even injured. Of course, she knew Izuku wasn't injured, but the thought of her baby boy facing off against a horde of villains terrified her. Izuku may be strong, but everyone has a weakness. What if he had done something that he couldn't come back from? What if he killed someone and was put under arrest? What if he resisted and ended up hurting or killing someone innocent? These thoughts and worries swirl through Inko's mind as she holds onto Izuku with tears streaming down her face. But then she feels a gentle hand cup her right cheek. Inko opens her eyes to look at Izuku, who still has the same emotionless expression. But there's something different about it, Mom. It's all right. It's over now. My teachers and classmates are fine. The police arrested all the villains. I'm safe. Inko buries her face into Izuku's shoulder as she cries out, feeling a little more comforted from Izuku's attempt. Izuku strokes Inko's hair soothingly. It's all right, Mom. I'm here. I promise I won't leave you. The next 3 days go by in a flash. UA is still working on upgrading their security protocols, but it is now confirmed safe for students to go to school. During homeroom, Aizawa stands before the rest of the class. All right, everyone. I hope you're prepared, because the fight's not over yet. A few of the students gulp as they think worriedly, what's he got planned for us? Aizawa states the UA Sports Festival is coming up. The class cheers in excitement before Aizawa uses his quirk, silencing the class. Aizawa then asks, now then, are there any questions? Jiru raises her hand. Is it really such a good idea for UA to be holding a festival shortly after we were just attacked by a bunch of villains? Aizawa answers as he looks at Jairu. I asked the principal the same question, but he seems to think that we should continue to hold the festival to show that UA is confident in repelling any villains that may try to attack us. While everyone here knows what really happened that day, the story is that the villains were defeated by All Might, 13, and myself. Aizawa continues. While I personally don't like the idea of taking credit, I certainly don't want to jeopardize a hero student's future. Eraserhead pointedly looks at Izuku, who nods in understanding before he looks back over the class. However, that isn't the only reason. This is also an opportunity to show hero agencies what you're capable of and work on cementing your roles as heroes. The sports festival happens only once a year. You only have 3 years, meaning that you have to make every second count. Understand? The class replies in unison, yes, sir. The rest of the day goes by relatively quickly until lunch break. As Class 1A goes to leave the classroom, they see a crowd of students all around their door. Kaminari asks in shock, "Whoa, what the heck is going on?" Bakugo answers as he moves to the front of the class. They're here to scope out the competition. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed student comments with a smug smirk, "Competition? The way I heard it, none of you even so much as did anything during that villain attack. Are you sure that any of you actually deserve to be in the hero course, much less in Class 1A? A few of Class 1A shift uncomfortably since Izuku was the only one who faced the villains while they all ran away. Bakugo, on the other hand, growled in both frustration and irritation. However, before a fight could break out, Izuku replies as he walks towards the blonde student, "Could you have done any better?" The blonde looks at Izuku, confused by his question. Huh? Izuku repeats, "Could you have done any better?" Izuku explains, "In case if you haven't already noticed, we're all first years still in our first week of training. Yet you seem to think that we're not only strong enough, but well-trained enough to take on a horde of villains. I don't know if you're naive or just outright stupid." The blonde growls angrily while a few students behind him chuckle before Izuku steps into the boy's personal space. "In either case, if I were you, I'd be less worried about us and more worried about yourself. If you focus too much on how we're progressing, then you won't realize just how far you're falling behind. So instead of antagonizing our class, perhaps you should focus more on your training, or else you won't even make it past the first round in the sports festival." The blonde clenches his fists before he yells, "It doesn't matter how strong Class 1A gets. Class 1B will still beat you in the sports festival." Izuku says with a cold stare, "You can try." From Izuku's words, the crowd of students feels something that they can't quite place, but it almost felt like fear. Suddenly, a boy with wild purple hair and bags under his eyes asks, "Is this how the hero course acts?" The purple-haired boy comments as all eyes are now on him, "I figured that you all would be more heroic, but so far I'm unimpressed. It seems to me that the 2 hero course classes only know how to start fights, but don't forget that the sports festival is a chance for everyone else too. If any of you so much as fall, the rest of us won't hesitate to take your place. You can consider this a declaration of war." Tension fills the air as everyone looks at the purple-haired student before Izuku states, "Actually, we have a spot open." Everyone looks at Izuku as they blink in surprise. "Our teacher actually expelled a student on the first day of school. He even threatened to expel me for not using my full power." The purple-haired boy looks at Izuku in surprise. "If you truly want to be a hero, then I expect you to give it your all during the sports festival." Shinso thinks to himself as he looks at Izuku, "I can't tell if this guy is serious or if he's actually looking down on me. He hasn't changed expressions once, but for some reason I don't think he's trying to pick a fight with me like that blonde idiot was trying to do earlier." After that, the crowd disperses as they all head to the lunchroom. Kirishima comments with a sigh of relief, "Man, that was intense." As they walk to the cafeteria, they all chatter amongst themselves over what had just happened, the sports festival, and how they're going to train themselves. Uraraka comments as she walks alongside Izuku, Yaoyorozu, and Jairu, "I'm so pumped for the sports festival." Yaoyorozu giggles from Uraraka's excitement before Jiro replies with a smile, "I don't think I've ever seen you this excited, Uraraka." Uraraka turns towards her friends, "Of course I'm excited. This is our first step to our hero careers. This is our opportunity to show what we can do." Izuku then asks, "By the way, why do you guys want to be heroes?" Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, and Jairu look at Izuku in surprise. For a moment, no one speaks before Yaoyorozu answers nervously, "Well, for me, the reason why I want to be a hero is because, well, there's just so much I can do with my quirk." Of course, I can create any weapon I want, but I also want to help people with my creations rather than just fighting villains. Plus, Yaoyorozu smiles as she looks at Izuku. It would also mean that anyone can be a hero if given the right tools. Izuku's eyes widen in shock from Yaoyorozu's thoughtful answer before Jiru says, drawing everyone's attention while trying to appear nonchalant, while being nervous herself. Well, my reason isn't as thoughtful as all that. Honestly, I didn't really want to be a hero at first. I actually wanted to be a musician like my parents. I saw that their music made people happy, and I wanted to make people smile too. But then I saw this little kid getting bullied. I stepped in and scared the bullies off. After that, I sort of may have taught him a few tricks on defending himself. When I taught him a new trick, he would always smile and thank me. I guess that's when I decided I wanted to be a hero. Uraraka comments, looking depressed. Your guy's reasons are so much better than mine. Yaoyorozu asks curiously, what's your reason, Uraraka? Uraraka blushes embarrassedly before she quietly answers, money. Jiru asks with a quirked eyebrow, money. Uraraka then explains as she looks down, you see, my parents own this construction company, and they haven't been getting a lot of contracts for the past few years. We're even having trouble making ends meet. They spent all their spare cash just to send me to UA. I just want to be a hero so that I can make lots of money and give my parents an easy life. Yaoyorozu and Jiru look at Uraraka sympathetically before Izuku walks up to Uraraka and places a hand on her shoulder, causing her to look at him before he says, Uraraka, that is a noble goal. Uraraka's eyes widen in surprise. You're trying to become a hero in order to provide for your family, and you're using your powers in order to help people. You have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. I'm only becoming a hero simply because of a memory. If anyone here has a shallow reason for trying to become a hero, then it's me. Uraraka opens her mouth, but Yaoyorozu cuts, and that's not true, Midoriya. Izuku turns as they all look at Yaoyorozu, who has a determined expression. Your reason for wanting to be a hero isn't shallow. You have lost so much throughout your life because you were quirkless. You were treated so horribly because you were quirkless. You've had your hopes and dreams taken from you because you were quirkless. Yet, you're still hanging on to the one thing that you wanted most in life. So no, your reason is not shallow. Izuku stares in shock before Jiru adds with her own determined expression, yeah, you had every reason to become a villain, but you decided to become a hero instead. You had a choice to be good or evil, and you didn't even have emotions to stop you, but you're still trying to be a hero anyway. Uraraka jumps in also with a determined expression as she looks at Izuku. You have taught us just how unfair the world is. You've shown us just how cruel the world can be. You've given us the opportunity not just as heroes, but as people to help change it, so that nobody has to go through what you did. Izuku looks between his three friends with a shocked expression before he feels his lips slightly curve upwards into a light smile as his eyes soften. Thank you. The girls are all surprised by Izuku's smile, and this time Izuku actually does feel something, gratitude. As Uraraka looks at Izuku's smile, she feels her heart skip a beat as she blushes lightly as she thinks he looks so handsome when he smiles. After 3 weeks, it's finally the day of the sports festival. Class 1A are all waiting in their designated waiting room in their gym uniforms. Most of them chatter among themselves until Todoroki walks up to Izuku, who is sitting at a table with his eyes closed. Midoriya. Izuku opens his right eye as he looks up at Todoroki. Objectively speaking, you're far stronger than me. However, that gives me all the more reason to beat you. Everyone looks at Todoroki and Izuku before Izuku replies with both eyes open. Now, if you plan on beating me, then you're going to have to use more than half of your power. Otherwise, you won't even force me to use more than a quarter of mine. Todoroki glares at Izuku angrily before Kirishima steps between them. Easy, guys. We're all friends here. Todoroki walks away as he states coldly, I'm not here to make friends. Not too long afterwards, they're called out to the field. As they walk out, Present Mike announces their arrival along with the other classes. Midnight, acting as the umpire, says into the microphone, and now to give the speech, we have Izuku. Midoriya. Izuku calmly makes his way up onto the stage and in front of the microphone stand. Shigaraki, staring at a TV screen, says aloud, that's him, sensei. He's the one who beat Nomo. All for One hums curiously from his own room as he too is watching the sports festival. I can't wait to see what he's capable of, but at least we have his name now. Shigaraki replies with a grin, now we just have to convince him to join us. Hirojiri isn't the type to question Sensei's ideas, but he definitely has a bad feeling over this one. Izuku asks into the microphone, "What is a heart?" This gains everyone's attention as well as curiosity. People occasionally refer to it when making speeches. They speak of it as though it were something they could hold in the palm of their hand. However, more often than not, the people who give speeches only mention the heart in order to gain support. Politicians, businessmen, even heroes speak of this so-called heart in order to change the polls by making themselves seem more sympathetic and therefore appealing. They wish to make themselves appear as though they're good and morally righteous. But as the saying goes, looks can be deceiving. Izuku continues, "I've met many people who pretend to be good in front of the public, but are actually cruel behind closed doors." Izuku's former teachers and classmates who are watching the sports festival start sweating nervously as they realize what Izuku is going to say, believe it or not. But a little over a year ago, I was diagnosed as quirkless. My peers treated me like trash. They would verbally and physically abuse me while using their quirks, which as many of you know is illegal. Inko begins to tear up as Izuku had never told her what he endured, but she was suspicious they would call me worthless. They'd say that I was useless, that my father left because I was quirkless. Most of the heroes are disgusted by what they're hearing along with the students. However, the teachers weren't much better. In fact, I'd argue that they were worse. They would often humiliate me in class. They'd ignore or even just watch in amusement while I was being beaten. On occasion, they would even encourage it, and if I ever complained, then they'd say that it was my fault for being weak, for being quirkless. The teachers all start to realize just exactly how bad Izuku was treated, as well as start to understand why he lost his emotions. For 10 years of my life, I went through hell. However, one day during my final year, one of my classmates had told me that if I really wanted to be a hero, then I should pray for a quirk in my next life and take a swan dive of the roof of a building. Everyone in the stadium gasps in shock except for Class 1A and Aizawa. Inko holds her hands over her mouth as she cries. Sensei comments, "Perhaps it'll be easier to convince young Midoriya to join us than I initially thought." Hirojiri thinks to himself, if we try to force Midoriya to join us, he might just turn on us. Nedzu immediately decides to track down every teacher Izuku had at every school he went to, have their teaching license revoked, and arrested. He's also going to look into each student that Izuku went to school with and blacklist them from becoming heroes. Izuku then comments, "You'd think that at some point along the way I would have gotten used to hearing stuff like that, but I was an emotional kid back then." However, that wasn't even the worst thing that happened to me that day. Everyone who didn't already know what Izuku went through think to themselves, what could be worse than that? Izuku continues, "After school let out, I met a top-ranked hero. Heroes are supposed to inspire people to do good and be good to others. So, since I thought that they'd at least give me some confidence, I asked them if I could become a hero even without a quirk. All Might looks down in shame while everyone else thinks I don't like where this is going. Izuku answers, he said, "Sorry kid, but no, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk." Even though Aizawa had already heard the story, it still pisses him off beyond belief. But now the rest of his co-workers are feeling his righteous fury along with Nedzu. A lot of the heroes who have non-offensive quirks are pissed off. Even a few heroes with offensive quirks are angry. Izuku then says this hero was supposed to have a heart of a hero, but he was just like everyone else, and hearing it from not just a hero, but a top-ranked hero, hurt so much more. They left shortly afterwards, not even giving me a second glance, leaving there in my pain, despair, and anguish. All the pain and suffering I've held back over the years finally flooded my mind, and as I was drowning in my hopelessness and despair, my quirk finally manifested. When it did, I realized that I no longer had any emotions. All the pain and despair I felt was just gone. It was like a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders, and at the time, I never wanted to get them back. Izuku then looks down, however. When my mom had learned about my quirk and how I lost my emotions, she cried. When I heard her cry, I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to tell her that everything was all right. But since I no longer had my emotions, I only ended up hurting her even more. It was at that moment that I realized a heart isn't something to be used or hurt lightly, because you never know when you might lose it. Izuku looks out towards the crowd. A heart isn't something to be talked about so lightly. Those who truly have hearts and care about those around them don't talk about hearts. True heroes and truly good people show their hearts through their actions, by saving and helping those around them even when it isn't asked for. A heart is the embodiment of empathy, sympathy, kindness, care, and love. That's why when I become a hero, I'm going to put an end to all forms of quirk discrimination and expose every single false hero as the monsters they truly are. The crowd stands up in applause with the students and teachers. Uraraka smiles proudly at Izuku as he walks off the stage. At the same time, Todoroki watches Izuku with mixed feelings. He understands Izuku's goal, but he has his own goal to fight for as well. Midnight then says as she wipes away a stray tear, now with that inspirational speech out of the way, let the sports festival begin. After hearing Izuku's opening speech for the sports festival, many people are immediately rooting for him to win. A man with black hair, turquoise eyes, and covered in scars watches the jumbo TV on the street with rapt attention. He wonders to himself if Izuku actually will keep his promise and expose the fake heroes of society. However, he also sympathizes with Izuku's background and understands why he would keep said promise if what he's saying is true. Meanwhile, a blonde-haired girl with two side buns and yellow eyes watches the TV with a blush. He's so handsome. Add on his background, and she becomes even more infatuated since she was abused and neglected because of her villainous quirk. However, when Izuku states with complete seriousness that he's going to expose fake heroes, that she starts to fall for him. At the same time, a pink-haired lizard man with a red scarf and white bandana mask across his eyes watches with a smile. The man comments to himself, it seems this kid is a follower of Stain as well. I'm sure Stain would love to meet him. However, Stain isn't watching the sports festival. In fact, he's trying to decide who his next target should be. Midnight announces as the screens roll like a slot machine for the first round of the sports festival. We have the screens stop the obstacle course. Midnight then explains as a map of the track is shown on screen. As the contestants run through the track, there will be certain obstacles and surprises that they'll be forced to overcome. Now go beyond, plus ultra. The students all cheer before the head for the starting line, which happens to be a giant red gate. After a few moments, the race starts as Present Mike calls out go. All the students rush through the exit, but wind up congesting the tunnel with everyone trying to go at once. However, most of the hero students from 1A use their quirks in order to exit the tunnel. Todoroki runs ahead of everyone before he hears Present Mike narrate, looks like the Midoriya has managed to reach the first obstacle. Todoroki looks ahead in surprise to see Izuku standing off in the distance before a horde of zero-pointers. Todoroki thinks to himself, how did he get ahead of me so quickly? I thought for sure that he wasn't even at the front of the pack. Aizawa explains while the audience is confused over how Izuku managed to get ahead of everyone else. Midoriya has a technique he calls Sonido. It allows him to travel at incredible speeds in under a second. Present Mike comments, talk about impressive. Guess the little listeners got to go fast. Aizawa groans in annoyance of Present Mike's joke. Izuku looks up at the zero-pointers looming over him and thinks about using his Zero, but decides against it. He doesn't want to use one of his most powerful attacks right off the bat. Besides, it's not like he can't just simply rush through them. Izuku uses Sonido to make it to the other side of the area without the robots even realizing. Meanwhile, Todoroki has finally reached the area and uses his ice in order to freeze them while they're off-balanced. Todoroki thinks to himself irritably, does Midoriya think this is some sort of game or something? Present Mike then announces, wow, it looks like Midoriya just sped past all the zero-pointers and already made it to the second obstacle. Izuku stands before a cliff with several wires stretching outwards connecting to different platforms that connect to each other. Honestly, Izuku could have just simply used Sonido all the way to the finish line, but he doubts the audience would appreciate that. So instead, he decides to jump from one platform to the next in quick succession before he finally makes it to the other side. Present Mike comments, wow, looks like Midoriya just passed through the second obstacle like it was nothing. Aizawa replies, Midoriya possesses incredible strength and has an ability he calls Pesquisa. This ability enhances his perception of everything and everyone around him. It's almost like a sixth sense. From what I understand, he can also use this ability in order to gauge his opponent's fighting capabilities. Even with what they've seen so far, almost every hero can tell just how powerful Izuku is with his super strength, super speed, and enhanced perception. Todoroki runs across the wires while freezing them as he glares at Izuku's back. Izuku then uses Sonido to reach the next obstacle. Present Mike then announces it looks like Midoriya has made it to the final obstacle. How is he planning to overcome it? Izuku could very well Sonido over the mines, but that'd just be anticlimactic. So instead he decides to quickly but efficiently run at normal speed between the mines. However, as Izuku is about a quarter of the way through, Todoroki freezes the ground and thus Izuku's feet. Izuku looks back with his emotionless expression to see Todoroki with an angry expression running towards him. Izuku wonders to himself what's he so mad about. However, Bakugo is flying behind him by using his explosions to propel himself forward. Get back here, half and half. Izuku then thinks to himself, now Bakugo, I can understand. Izuku breaks the ice before he Sonidos to the finish line. Since the minefield has been frozen, there's no point in pretending that it was actually difficult. As Izuku appears in the stadium, confetti shoots out. As Present Mike announces Izuku Midoriya has taken first place. The crowd cheers while Todoroki comes in second place and Bakugo comes in third, both feeling intense frustration. Todoroki glares at Izuku while more contestants pass the finish line. Meanwhile, Bakugo simply looks at Izuku as he thinks, I knew I wasn't going to take first place. Midoriya is just too strong. However, Bakugo turns his attention towards Todoroki with a glare. Half and half thinks he can win this fucking festival while only using half of his power. If Midoriya doesn't beat that stupid idea out of his head, then I will. Uraraka walks up to Izuku after she finishes with sweat running down her face and a smile. Can't say I'm surprised that you took first place. Izuku looks at her before Yaoyorozu and Jiraiya walk up to them. Jiraiya comments honestly, I was expecting you to just clear the entire course in the first few seconds. Izuku replies with a shrug, I could have, but I felt that the audience deserved to see what I was capable of, but I wasn't expecting Todoroki to freeze the ground there at the end. Yaoyorozu nods in agreement, I know what you mean. After he froze the ground, it wasn't even an obstacle anymore. Midnight then states with a crack of her whip, now. On to the second round. The screens begin to roll again before they finally stop. King of the Hill. Midnight explains all of you will be splitting off into groups of 3 or 4. Each group will try to earn the most points. A map of the field shows where rings around the hill with different colors and numbers to indicate what points those areas are worth. The areas you see on screen are the amount of points you'll receive. The bottom is worth the 10 points, while the one at the top is worth 50 points. Points will be given out after each minute. The group with the most points wins the round. Each teammate will earn points for their team. However, Midnight smiles sadistically. The winner of the last round will be handicapped. The students all look at Izuku as Midnight explains they will have to wear a quirk suppressant anklet, and their team will only receive half of the points they normally would. Now, time to group up. Izuku walks towards Midnight as she hands him the anklet before he cuffs it around his ankle. When he turns around, he already sees most of the people already grouping up. Izuku thinks to himself, if I still had emotions, I'd probably be freaking out right now and worrying about finding teammates. Izuku is broken out of his thoughts when he sees Uraraka walking up to him with a smile. Are you ready to win, Midoriya? Izuku comments, I'm surprised you'd join up with me since I'll basically be reducing our number of points by half. Uraraka replies, yeah, but you're super strong even with your quirk being suppressed. Besides, I couldn't let my best friend fend for himself. Izuku blinks in surprise as he thinks best friend? Uraraka then turns around as she starts looking around. Now then, we need at least one more person to join us. Izuku looks down at the anklet on his leg, trying to figure out how much power he's capable of. When he asked Midnight how much power it suppresses, she had told him that it suppresses half of his power. However, since most of his power is locked behind his transformations, that means that in his base form, he can only use a little more than 12%. If he were to use his first transformation, then he'd only be able to use 25%. Then in his final form, he'd only have 50%. Izuku wonders to himself as he looks at the anklet, I wonder if they'll let me use this during the final round. However, he's broken out of his thoughts as a girl with pink dreadlocks confidently walks towards them. Uraraka doesn't seem to notice, and if Izuku didn't have his pesquisa, he might not have noticed her either. The pink-haired girl loudly greets, hello there, Mr. First Place. Uraraka jumps in surprise before she turns around to see the girl. My name's May Hatsum, engineer extraordinaire. and I would like to join your team. Izuku asks curiously any particular reason as to why. Most people would tend to avoid those that would only hinder their progress. Hatsum laughs before she answers that may be true, but you took first place in the last round without even trying, so I seriously doubt you'll lose. Hatsum then lifts her goggles. Besides, I'm only in this festival to show off my babies, so with you being Mr. First Place, everyone will have their eyes on you. Uraraka blushes as she exclaims babies. Hatsum nods as she steps aside to reveal a crate full of her inventions. Izuku comically thinks to himself, how did I not notice that? Hatsum then starts to pull out various inventions and explains what each of them is capable of. At that moment, Izuku starts to formulate a plan. After Hatsum is done showing off her babies, Izuku informs both Uraraka and Hatsum of the plan he's come up with. Present Mike calls out when the stadium has been raised into the form of a steep hill. Begin. Izuku sonidos to the top with ease while Uraraka negates her own gravity, while keeping the gravity on the hover boots Hatsum gave her to follow after Izuku, while Hatsum uses a jetpack to fly to the top. As Izuku stands above everyone else on the hill, he notices Ida rushing towards him before sending out a quirk-powered kick, which Izuku blocks by raising his right arm. Izuku then uses a kick of his own to send Ida tumbling back down. While Izuku's back is turned, another contestant tries to go in for a surprise attack before Uraraka grabs them and throws them aside before releasing her quirk. At the same time, Hatsum uses her net gun in order to trap another contestant before Uraraka asks, "Are you alright, Midoriya?" Izuku nods in affirmation, "I'm fine. Now let's hold the line. Make sure to use the gear that Hatsum gave you." Uraraka replies with a determined expression, "Right." The three of them then proceed to fight off a horde of students aiming for the top, while also watching each other's backs. Bakugu launches himself into the air above the hill as he yells out angrily, "Deku." Izuku turns to face Bakugu with his same emotionless expression as Bakugu falls towards him with his hand outstretched before letting out an explosion at the point of contact. As the smoke clears, Bakugu has a hold of Izuku's left arm, which he used to block the explosion. Izuku comments, "Giving away your position during a fight isn't what I would call smart." Izuku then kicks Bakugu in the stomach, causing him to fall down the hill before he fires off a few explosions to regain his footing. Bakugu screams angrily as he launches himself upwards, ready to attack Izuku again, but is intercepted when Hatsum shoots him with her net gun. Izuku looks over at Hatsum before nodding in gratitude, even if it wasn't necessary. However, immediately afterwards, the ground is frozen in a sheet of ice. Izuku looks to his right to see Todoroki looking at him before he sends out a wave of ice. Izuku shatters the oncoming ice with a wave of his left hand before he slams down his right foot to shatter the sheet of ice. Izuku sonidos in front of Todoroki before hitting him in the chest with the palm of his right hand, causing him to slide back before Todoroki creates a slab of ice to prevent himself from falling. Izuku glances out of the side of his eye to see Uraraka looking at him worriedly before he subtly shakes his head. Uraraka nods in understanding as she continues to defend her position at the top of the hill alongside Hatsum. Todoroki comments, "You aren't even taking this seriously." Izuku looks at Todoroki, who he sees is now upset. "You could have easily won the first round within seconds, but you held back the entire time." Izuku counters, coming from the one who won't even use half of his power. "That doesn't mean much." Todoroki coldly replies, "At least I'm using half." Uraraka and Hatsum fight the oncoming onslaught of contestants not too far from each other. Uraraka uses her quirk in order to toss people aside, while Hatsum uses one of her many gadgets in order to repel them. At one point, Uraraka notices an opponent has managed to sneak past them and is currently behind Hatsum with their quirk at the ready. However, Uraraka catches the opponent by surprise before throwing them aside, which catches Hatsum's attention. Hatsum smiles at Uraraka, "Looks like I owe you one." Uraraka smiles at her appreciation before Hatsum aims her net gun over Uraraka's shoulder to take out an opponent behind her. Uraraka looks back to see the fallen contestant before she looks back at Hatsum with a smirk. "Looks like that makes us even." Hatsum then tosses Uraraka one of her babies before the two of them return to their respective positions in order to fight of the enemies that re-approaching them. However, as time passes, the sooner people begin to realize that it's pointless to fight against Izuku's team. Izuku is far too powerful even with his quirk being suppressed. Uraraka negates the gravity of anything she touches, making close combat pointless. And Hatsum is practically a one-girl army with her babies, not to mention that she gave Uraraka some of her gadgets. Todoroki rushes towards Izuku, who sidesteps out of the way, but Todoroki, being as well trained as he is, manages to maintain his footing on the shattered ice. Todoroki comments, "You always use your quirk in order to intimidate your opponent. You've never taken a single fight seriously since we started at UA." Izuku asks, "Seriously, are you trying to use arguments that could be used against yourself?" Todoroki yells angrily, "Unlike you, I have a reason for only using my right side." Izuku quirks an eyebrow before Todoroki rushes towards him. Todoroki manages to grab hold of Izuku's arm with his right hand before he starts to freeze him. However, even with Izuku's powers being suppressed, he manages to break the ice around him with his strength before tossing Todoroki aside. Todoroki asks quietly why. Izuku narrows his eyes at Todoroki before he says loudly, "Why are you holding back? This is our chance to show the world what we're capable of, and you're not even going to use even half of your power." Izuku asks curiously as he tilts his head slightly, "Why are you so angry?" Todoroki looks at Izuku in surprise. "You're getting angry at me for doing the same thing that you're doing. Doesn't that seem a little hypocritical?" Todoroki clenches his teeth in anger. "I have my reasons." Izuku counters coldly, "Everyone has a reason for doing what they do, so I fail to see your point." Todoroki clenches his fist before Izuku says, "I have a reason for not using my full power, or even half of it. Any higher than 25%, and any action I take will cause massive damage. Any higher than 50%, and my power becomes unstable. If I were to use 100%, I can't guarantee that I won't accidentally destroy a city in the process." Todoroki asks with a glare, "And how do we know you aren't lying?" This gains Izuku's attention. "How do we know that what you're saying is even true? If it were true, then why haven't you shown everyone what you're capable of?" Todoroki then yells out, "You're heartless. You have no emotions. Everything means absolutely nothing to you. So why wouldn't I believe you're lying?" Izuku replies, "You're right." Todoroki's eyes widen in shock from Izuku's admission, "I am heartless and I don't have emotions. To be perfectly honest, I don't particularly care about what happens to this world or the people who live in it. I could very well destroy everything, and I'd every reason to, considering how this world has treated me since I was 4 years old. I could have killed my former classmates. I could have killed the hero who crushed my dreams. I could destroy everything in the world without a shred of remorse." As Izuku speaks, Todoroki feels a twinge of fear as his tone remains scarily calm. "However, you're wrong about everything meaning nothing to me." Izuku starts to walk towards Todoroki. "The only reason I haven't done any of that is because of my mom. Even though she never believed in me, she still cared about me." Todoroki takes a step back. "I've also come to realize that not all people are as cruel as the ones I had previously met. There are those who genuinely care and worry about my safety despite knowing what I'm capable of." Todoroki takes another step back. "There are also those who, despite knowing I have no emotions and no heart, still try to get close to me." Izuku is now in Todoroki's face. "Besides, who's to say that I'm not telling the truth?" The left side of Todoroki's body starts to ignite in fight or flight response before they hear Present Mike call out, "Time's up." The flames are immediately extinguished in relief before Izuku walks away from Todoroki. Uraraka wipes the sweat from her head as she comments, "I can't believe we did it." Uraraka then looks over at Hatsum with a smile. "Your babies are amazing, Hatsum." Hatsum replies with her own smile as she pulls up her goggles and lands, "I knew you'd like them." Midnight then says as she gestures to the screen with her whip, "Now then, it's time to total up the points." On the screen it shows Izuku's team in first, Todoroki's team in second, Bakugo's team in third, and Shinsu's team in fourth. However, since Izuku's team only had 3 people on his team, one position is open for another contestant in the final round. The crowd cheers and applause for the winning teams. However, Todoroki and Bakugo aren't the least bit happy. Bakugo is furious at not coming in first, not coming in second, but coming in third. Todoroki, on the other hand, is looking at his left hand as he realizes what just happened towards the end of that match. Present Mike announces, "Now, before we begin the third and final round, we're going to take an intermission for everyone to take their lunch." Present Mike turns off the microphone as he says, "Come on, Shota, let's go get something to eat." Aizawa grabs his sleeping bag as he follows after present Mike. Uraraka grabs Izuku's hand with a smile as she says, "Come on, Midoriya. Let's go find a place to eat before all the seats are taken." However, Todoroki interrupts them when he says Midoriya. Izuku looks over at Todoroki while Uraraka looks at him with a glare. "We need to talk." Uraraka looks like she wants to protest, especially after what she heard Todoroki say about Izuku. But Izuku looks at her and says, "Go." Uraraka looks at Izuku in surprise. "Save me a seat." Uraraka nods before she reluctantly walks off. Izuku then asks as he looks at Todoroki, "So, are you finally going to tell me what's been bothering you?" Todoroki replies, "Not here. We need to go somewhere more private." Izuku then motions with his hand, "Lead the way." Todoroki then leads Izuku inside the stadium. Izuku and Todoroki stand opposite of each other in a hallway. They've been standing there for almost a minute of silence. However, Todoroki is still trying to think of what he wants to say, and Izuku doesn't feel the awkwardness of the situation, but still recognizes it. Eventually, Izuku comments, "If we stay here any longer, we're going to wind up missing lunch, and while that doesn't mean much for me, I doubt you could go without it." Todoroki looks at Izuku for a moment before he finally says, "I was overwhelmed." This catches Izuku's attention, and it made me break the promise I made to myself a long time ago. Todoroki says as he looks at his left hand, no one else on the field even caught a glimpse of what had happened. In that moment, I felt what Bakugo had felt during our first exercise, an overwhelming sense of fear and also power. It reminded me of All Might, how he's the strongest hero in the world, and how villains are afraid of him when he arrives. The power that was coming from you felt similar to All Might's. Todoroki then asks as he looks at Izuku, "Midoriya, are you All Might's secret love child?" Izuku blinks as he's caught off guard before he comments, "I can't tell if you're being serious right now or not." Todoroki replies with a nod, "I am." Izuku answers, "No, I'm not All Might's secret love child. My sperm donor divorced my mom and abandoned us when he found out I was quirkless. I can't even remember what he looks like or what his voice used to sound like, but his existence is inconsequential." Todoroki hums in interest, "I see, but it's still strange that All Might would be teaching at UA where you're attending. Add on to the fact that you two are similar in the aspects of strength and power. It would make sense if you were." Izuku's eyes narrow. "My sperm donor's name is Hisashi Midoriya. He has a fire-breathing quirk. There is absolutely no relation between All Might and myself." Todoroki counters, "Unless that's the cover story you're using." Izuku then asks, "What is the point of your questions if you aren't even going to believe my answer?" Todoroki thinks for a moment before he answers, "My father is the hero Endeavor. He's been after All Might's position as number one for years. So, if you're similar in power to All Might, then that gives me all the more reason to beat you no matter how strong you claim to be." Izuku then asks, "Is this some way of trying to make your father proud?" Todoroki glares harshly as he answers, "No." Todoroki recomposes himself before he asks, "Have you ever heard of quirk marriages?" Izuku's eyes widen as Todoroki explains they became a problem in the first few generations of quirks after they became widespread. There were those who sought out potential mates solely with the intention of creating powerful offspring. Many people were forced into relationships. It was viewed as old-fashioned arranged marriages, but clearly it was unethical. Todoroki continues as Izuku clenches his fists. "My father has a rich history of accomplishments and plenty of money to throw at his problems. He bought my mother's relatives in order to get his hands on her quirk, and now he's using me to usurp All Might." A burning sensation emanates from Izuku's chest. "It's so annoying. I refuse to be a tool for that selfish bastard. In every memory of my mother, I always see her crying." Todoroki puts his hand on his scar. "I remember, she called my left side unbearable before she poured boiling water on my face." Todoroki then states, "The reason I picked a fight with you was to show what I was capable of doing without having to rely on his damned fire quirk. I'm going to show him that I reject his power." Todoroki looks up only to be surprised by the look of pure fury on Izuku's face. He also notices the black and green energy emanating from his body as his fists shake in righteous anger. However, Izuku soon regains control over his power as the feeling in his chest slowly fades. "I understand." Todoroki is surprised from Izuku's response. "If I were to have gone through what you did, I too would be consumed by hatred." However, Izuku looks Todoroki in the eyes. "If you truly plan on beating me, then you'd better stop holding back." Todoroki glares in anger before Izuku, says if I were to let you beat me without a proper challenge, then you'd never know if you could beat me with just your ice. On the other hand, if I were to give you a proper challenge, then you must realize that your ice won't be enough to beat me. In either scenario, do you honestly think Endeavor cares in the slightest? Todoroki asks, what do you mean? Izuku explains, considering how arrogant and childish Endeavor is, I seriously doubt that he cares about how you surpass All Might. I've studied heroes for as long as I can remember. I've studied their quirks, fighting styles, even combinations and team-ups. However, I've also given them my own personal ranking based on their personalities with the public and how they handle situations. Endeavor was always ranked at the lower end of the spectrum due to his personality and way of treating people, heroes, civilians, vigilantes, or villains. To put it simply, Endeavor is the kind of hero who believes the ends justify the means, so why would he care about how you get to the top as long as you get there? Todoroki's eyes widen in realization before he asks angrily, then why would he try to force me to use his fire? Izuku answers abruptly, because you're hindering yourself. Todoroki jerks back as though he were slapped in the face as Izuku continues, you have the power of both ice and fire, yet you're only using half of it. In any real-life situation, you'd not only put civilians, but also yourself in danger as well. Considering how popularized heroes are, there's no doubt that people will start to figure out that you leave your left side completely open. And if I were to figure that out in less than a month of knowing you, how far do you think your career will go once villains figure it out? Izuku then says, besides, you say that you don't want to be controlled by Endeavor, yet you're playing right into his hands by allowing him to control every part of your life. Todoroki asks, what are you talking about? Izuku answers, everything you've done up to now has been despite Endeavor. Every action, every thought, everything has been because of Endeavor and nothing else. By allowing your judgment to be clouded by your hatred for Endeavor, you're ultimately allowing him to control every part of your life. Todoroki's eyes widen before he looks down at his left hand before Izuku, says if you truly want to get back at your father, then do what I do. Todoroki looks back up to see Izuku's cold, emotionless eyes ignore his existence. Todoroki stares in shock, you are not Endeavor, I'm not All Might, and they're not us. Therefore they are inconsequential to our lives or our choices. In All Might's case, it's because I have no relation to him. In Endeavor's case, it's because he has no right to call himself a hero, husband, or father. He's nothing but trash, so treat him like trash. Izuku starts to walk away as he comments, I believe this conversation is over, but funnily enough, I'm grateful to you. Todoroki looks at Izuku, who is only a few steps away, because now I know that my emotions aren't entirely gone. As Izuku walks away, he and Todoroki both realize that what Izuku felt was rage. Even though it has faded, it hasn't disappeared. When Izuku enters the cafeteria, he finds Uraraka, who's sitting with their fellow classmates with an open seat beside her with a tray of food in front of it. Izuku takes his seat beside her, which causes Uraraka to jump in surprise before she realizes that it's Izuku. Jiraiya greets, hey Midoriya, where have you been? Izuku answers as he looks at Jiraiya, Todoroki wanted to talk to me about something. Kaminari asks curiously with a mouthful of food, what about? Izuku answers as he looks at Kaminari, I don't think Todoroki would like for me to tell anyone. Kaminari nods in understanding before Uraraka asks, noticing Izuku's tense shoulders, are you alright? Her expression then turns angry. He didn't say anything mean, did he? Izuku looks at Uraraka, mildly surprised by her seemingly protective behavior, before he answers no, although I did learn something. Yaoyorozu asks curiously as she looks at Izuku, oh, what did you learn? Izuku answers as he looks at Yaoyorozu as his nearby classmates look at him, I've learned that my emotions aren't entirely gone. Everyone's eyes widen in shock from Izuku's answer before he explains, ever since the entrance exam, I've been having these strange sensations. They don't happen very often, and I didn't really know the cause of them. The first emotion I felt was when Uraraka was trapped with the zero-pointer behind her. Everyone looks at Uraraka in surprise and worry as she continues to look at Izuku. When she was reaching out and calling for help, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. The emotion was like a spark. It was gone in an instant, and for quite some time I didn't know what to call it. But thinking back on it now, I'd say it was protective. Uraraka blushes lightly in surprise from what Izuku had said, but continues to listen along with the others. After that, I didn't feel anything for quite some time. Eventually, I forgot about it, assuming it was just my imagination. However, the next time I felt something was a few moments after I came out of the USJ. After I had given my statement to the police, for some reason Aizawa had ruffled my hair as he said, "Come on, kid. The others are waiting for you." Izuku's classmates were surprised by what Aizawa had said and start to wonder if he was actually as scary as they thought he was. Izuku continues when he had done that. I felt something else. Again, it was a spark, but I still can't put a word to it. I had never felt anything like it before. It felt kind. But even around Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, and Jiraiya I haven't felt anything. Plus, I've had little interaction with Aizawa prior. Azui comments, "It sounds to me like Aizawa was proud of you for what you did." Izuku looks at Azui before Kirishima adds thoughtfully, "Yeah. Plus what you described kinda reminds me of something a dad would do." Izuku replies seriously, "Aizawa is not my father." Kirishima then says as he looks at Izuku, "Well, yeah, I kinda figured, but my dad has kind of done the same thing." Kaminari adds with a smile, "Yeah, mine too." Ida then says, "Mine as well." Their other classmates also nod in agreement with Kirishima's statement. Jiraiya then comments, "You know, Midoriya, I've noticed you talk about your mom and how much she means to you, but what about your dad?" Izuku looks at Jiraiya before she explains, "I mean, in your speech you said that your former classmate said that he left because you were quirkless, but you never said that it was the truth." Izuku thinks back to his speech before he replies, "I suppose that's true." Izuku then looks at Jiraiya as all eyes are on him. "To be honest, I don't really know why my dad left. My mom had told me that he had to go to work overseas, but she never brought him up, and as a kid when I'd ask about him, she would just say that he was fine. Though she never explicitly stated, I'm fairly certain that he left my mom because of my quirklessness, which isn't too surprising if I'm being honest." Ashido yells out angrily, "Seriously?" Everyone looks at Ashido in surprise. Out of all the things he could have done, he decides to leave his wife and son just because you were quirkless? Izuku shrugs before he replies, "That's just how it is being quirkless." Everyone looks at Izuku sympathetically before Yaoyorozu says, "You never told us how you learned that your emotions aren't entirely gone. You've only told us what lead up to it." Izuku looks at Yaoyorozu as he answers, "During my talk with Todoroki, he told me some things about himself. When he told me, the emotion I felt wasn't a spark. If I had to compare it to something, it'd be a raging inferno. What I had felt was pure anger." Some of Izuku's fellow classmates gulp in fear of the idea of Izuku being angry, but it has now faded. Uraraka notices Izuku's wording before she asks, "You said it's faded. Is it still there?" Izuku looks at Uraraka before he answers with a nod, "Yes. It'll probably be a while before it completely disappears, likely due to how strong the emotion was." Hagakure then comments cheerfully, "Well, at least we know that your emotions aren't entirely gone." Everyone looks at her before she adds, "Plus, if that's the case, then maybe there's a way to bring your emotions back." Izuku looks down thoughtfully before he replies, "Perhaps." Yaoyorozu says aloud, "From what you've told us so far, it seems that your emotions only come out when you face something you aren't used to." Kirishima asks with a quirked eyebrow as he looks at Yaoyorozu, "What do you mean?" Yaoyorozu explains, "When you felt your first emotion, it was out of a desire to protect and save Uraraka. Your second spark of emotion came from when Aizawa expressed pride in you for what you had done. Then your third emotion came out when Todoroki told you something that greatly upset you." Yaoyorozu continues, "Perhaps the reason these feelings are able to come out is because you didn't feel them very often when you still had emotions. Of course, I have no evidence to back this up, and it's only a theory at this point, but it would seem to be a likely possibility due to your past. Also, given your experience, it's likely the cause of your emotions being lost is due to the amount of trauma you experienced throughout your life. Your last emotions were overwhelming pain and despair. So in order to save and protect yourself, your brain could have simply cut off all emotions. Although, that isn't to say that your quirk doesn't play a part in it, but it certainly explains why you lost your emotions in the first place." Izuku hums thoughtfully while their classmates are slightly disturbed by the theory. "It certainly sounds plausible. The emotions that I've felt recently aren't emotions that I felt very often before. I was mostly the source of most bullying, so I didn't have the opportunity to protect someone else very often. My mom wasn't exactly supportive of my dream of becoming a hero, but she did tell me how proud she was when I showed her my hero analysis books. Although, I don't recall ever feeling anger, so perhaps that's why I felt it so intensely as I did." Yaoyorozu then concludes as she looks at Izuku, if it's still possible to feel your emotions, then surely there must be a way for you to regain them completely. Uraraka comments happily with a beaming smile towards Izuku. You hear that, Midoriya? You could finally get your emotions back. Izuku replies with a nod. You're right, Uraraka. Izuku then turns to his food as he thinks, but are they worth it? As his classmates chatter amongst themselves, he wonders, is regaining my emotions what I want? All they've ever caused me is pain and suffering. Why would I want them back? I'm better off without them. I'm stronger, faster, smarter, and much more efficient than I was back when I still had emotions. I don't have to combat against irrational emotions when I have to make decisions that most others would find difficult. In the long run, remaining as I am is far more suitable than if I were to regain my emotions. Izuku then thinks, however, I know my mom wants me to return to my previous emotional self. I can tell that looking at me as I am now causes her pain that I'm unable to help her deal with since I lack the ability to empathize with her, and every time I try to comfort her, it comes out hollow. If I were able to regain my emotions, then I'd be able to ease her pain. But what would happen if I did regain my emotions? Would I become weaker, or would I lose my quirk entirely? If that's the case, then coming to UA would be pointless. After all, quirkless people can't become heroes. Izuku is brought out of his thoughts when the announcement of the third round is about to begin, so he goes to dump his tray before he heads back out into the field of the stadium. As he and his fellow students stand before the now constructed rectangular arena, Midnight announces, now then, it's time for the tournament portion of the festival. Midnight gestures to the screen behind her to reveal the brackets for the tournament. As Izuku looks at the screen, a familiar voice from behind him comments, looks like you and I are in the first match. Izuku turns his head to see the purple-haired boy from months ago as he thinks, so his name's Shinso Hitoshi. Izuku goes to reply, but Ojiro covers his mouth with his tail as he says with a glare, don't answer him. Shinso smirks before he walks away before Ojiro lowers his tail, and Izuku asks, why'd you stop me? Ojiro answers it has to do with his quirk. I know that it may seem like cheating, but as a friend and fellow classmate I feel like I should help you. Even though Izuku's expression doesn't show it, he's mildly surprised by Ojiro's admission as he thinks he considers me a friend. Izuku sits across from Ojiro in waiting room A. Ojiro explains when the second round was announced, and people were going around picking their teammates. I remember that Shinso guy had walked up to me and asked if I wanted to join his team, but when I went to answer, I found myself unable to move or speak. It was like I was in some sort of haze, but shortly before the round started, I found myself on Shinso's team. Ojiro looks at Izuku seriously. I believe that Shinso has a brainwashing quirk, one that doesn't work unless you reply to him. Izuku hums with interest. I see. That's quite the useful quirk he has. Ojiro bites out with frustration. It's disgraceful. Izuku looks back at Ojiro, who is looking down angrily. He forced me to join his team against my will. He used me like I was some sort of pawn. Izuku then asks, how did you expect him to win? Ojiro looks back up at Izuku in surprise as Izuku stares at him with cold, analytical eyes as he repeats, how did you expect him to win? Izuku explains it's obvious that being a general education student, that people would overlook him. They believe that his quirk was either too weak to make it into the hero course, or that his quirk wasn't an offense-based quirk in order to get him into the hero course. In either case, there's no doubt in my mind that the only people who would have accepted him would be the ones who had no other choice unless he used his quirk on someone. Ojiro argues while seeing Izuku's point, yeah, but it's still not right. He didn't know I was going to refuse, and he took my choice away from me. Izuku then counters, but you were going to refuse, weren't you? Izuku's statement hits Ojiro hard as he swallows before he nods yeah. Izuku then says, let me ask you something, Ojiro. Ojiro looks at Izuku as he wonders what Izuku is going to say. Let's say, for argument's sake, that during your hero career you come across a villain you can't defeat the way you are now. The villain has a hostage whom they are ready and willing to kill while you have absolutely no backup. How do you plan on defeating the villain in this scenario? Ojiro answers in confusion, but you just said that I couldn't defeat him. Izuku corrects, I said you can't defeat them the way you are now. So what would you do? Izuku elaborates, would remain steadfastly righteous and let the villain take an innocent life, as well as who knows how many others due to your own inability? Or would you taint yourself with evil in order to destroy an even greater evil? Ojiro's eyes widen in shock from Izuku's question. My point is that one day you might encounter a problem you simply can't fight against, and so you have to be ready and willing to make the decision to kill someone. It may be immoral, but it's just the way things are. No villain is going to let a hero beat them as long as they're stronger than them, or as long as they have an underhanded trick up their sleeve. Izuku continues, villains will take advantage of any and every weakness you give them, even going to far as to use your own morals to stop yourself. In this line of work, you can't waste a single moment on hesitation, because when you get right down to it, it's the civilians, yours, and the villains' lives on the line, and you will have to make a decision on which one must be sacrificed. Will you hold on to your morals and let an innocent person die? Or will you be willing to take the life of a villain if it means saving countless others? Izuku then says, the point that I'm trying to get across is that sometimes the methods you use to go about saving someone don't matter as much in some cases. In this particular case, Shinso has a brainwashing quirk that he's supposed to use in order to get anywhere in this competition. So how exactly do you expect him to get anywhere if he doesn't use it? Ojiro looks down in shame as Izuku continues. Can you even imagine what it must have been like for him growing up? It's likely that as soon as people learned he had a brainwashing quirk, they ostracized him and called him a villain or a freak. Do you think he had any friends before coming to UA? Do you think he has any friends now? Can you even comprehend the idea that people won't even talk to you simply because of something completely beyond your control? Ojiro answers tightly, no, I can't. Izuku replies, still with a cold expression and voice, but obviously trying and failing to emulate compassion. I'm not saying this to hurt you, but merely to get you to understand what it must have been like for Shinso. He used his quirk on you, because it was the only way he could win and prove himself in the final round. How is that any different from what the rest of us have been doing throughout this festival? Izuku lets his rhetorical question hang in the air before they hear the announcement. Izuku Midoriya and Shinso Hitoshi report to the stadium. Izuku stands up as he leaves. I want you to think about what we've discussed. Don't judge a person simply because of their quirk, judge them by their character. As Izuku leaves, Ojiro smiles sadly as he says to himself, looks like I've got a long way to go before I can call myself a hero. As Izuku walks through the halls towards the stadium, he hears present mic announce, for our first lineup of matches we have the emotionless, but surprisingly complex Izuku Midoriya. Izuku steps out into the light as the crowd cheers for him versus the dark horse of the general education course, Hitoshi Shinso. Izuku sees Shinso walking towards him before they stand across from each other on the platform. Midnight announces, now, during this final round you may fight and use your quirks however you please. However, if any of you start getting out of hand, then Cementos and I will be the ones to stop the fight. Now then, let the final round of the sports festival begin. As soon as the match begins, Shinso comments, it must be nice having such a powerful quirk after everything you've been through. Izuku doesn't reply as he knows Shinso is baiting him, but Izuku doesn't make a move. Shinso looks out to the crowd. I bet hearing the crowd cheer for you like that would make you really happy. That is if you still had your emotions. Izuku still doesn't reply as he watches Shinso. Shinso looks back at Izuku as he begins to feel frustrated. I mean, why are you even in the hero course if you can't even empathize with people? Aren't heroes supposed to help, protect, and inspire people? How do you expect to do that when you can't even connect with them on an emotional level? Shinso then says with a sardonic grin, I bet you didn't even take the entrance exam seriously. I bet you haven't even taken this entire festival seriously. You talked all big during your speech about hearts and how only imposters speak of them. But don't you realize that that implies that you don't have a heart either? How can you expect to become a hero if you don't even have a heart? The crowd begins to boo Shinso for his words before Izuku slowly starts walking towards Shinso. Shinso, realizing that Izuku isn't going to answer him, rushes forward as he pulls back his fist and punches Izuku in the face. However, Izuku takes the punch without even flinching or showing any signs of pain. Shinso, now thoroughly frustrated, starts punching Izuku in the chest and stomach. Shinso says as he hits Izuku, you may have been quirkless, but at least you were never called a villain. At least you still had your mom. At least people didn't hate and fear you because of your quirk. Now you have a quirk and you don't even have a fucking heart. But they still let you into the hero course despite it, while I get shafted the general education course all because my quirk can't affect robots. Shinso pulls back his fist as he yells, "Say something, damn it." Shinso punches Izuku in the face one last time before he starts panting from exhaustion, while Izuku remains unscathed. Izuku then gently grabs Shinso's arm, drawing his attention before he moves his hand to the center of his chest. Izuku then pulls Shinso's hand towards himself as Shinso expects to feel Izuku's chest, but his hand just goes right through. Shinso's eyes widen in horror as he's wrist deep into Izuku's chest before Izuku says, "You're right." Shinso looks Izuku in the eyes. "I don't have a heart." Shinso pulls his hand free from Izuku as he steps away. "The reason I want to be a hero is all for the sake of a memory. For a while I knew that my reason was shallow, that there were many others who have much more worthy reasons than I." However, Izuku walks towards Shinso. As Shinso steps back, "One of my classmates who has been trying her hardest to help me told me that my reason wasn't shallow, that the memory I've been doing this for was worth something, and that it was okay for me to hold on to it, even if I have no reason to. That memory is the last shred of my humanity. It's all I have left of my former self, and without it." Izuku gets face to face with Shinso. "I'm hollow." Shinso's breath hitches as he falls down, looking up at Izuku before Midnight announces Shinso is out of bounds. Izuku Midoriya is the winner. Shinso looks back to see his pinky finger just over the white line of the ring. Then he hears Izuku say, "Sorry for pushing you so far." Shinso looks forward to see Izuku holding out his hand before Shinso asks, "Why are you trying to help me when you don't even mean it?" Izuku answers softly, "Because it's what the old me would have done." Shinso's eyes widen in surprise before he starts to laugh quietly to himself. Shinso looks up at Izuku as he takes his hand. "You're one weird guy, Midoriya." Izuku pulls Shinso up to his feet, but a good one. The two combatants shake hands good-naturedly before Izuku raises their clasped hands together, which causes the crowd to cheer. Present Mike comments, "That's the most sportsmanship thing I've ever seen." Aizawa chastises, even with everything that Shinso had said and done to Midoriya, he still treats him with respect. "As heroes, you all should be ashamed of yourselves." Majority of the heroes in the audience look down in shame. Kirishima comments as he stands up, "That was so manly." Midoriya was taking all those hits and things Shinso was saying to him and still treats him like a worthy opponent. Gyro adds, "I've got to say, it was pretty cool of Midoriya to do that." Ida then states with chopping motions, "We should all learn from Midoriya's example." The class laugh from Ida's antics. Uraraka looks down at the ring looking at Izuku as she thinks to herself, "You really are amazing, Midoriya." As Shinso and Izuku leave from the same exit, Shinso comments in defeat, "Guess I won't be making it into the hero course after all." Izuku replies, "I wouldn't bet on that." Shinso looks at Izuku as they walk side by side. "We still have a spot open in our class, and I wouldn't be surprised if you caught Aizawa's attention since his quirk also doesn't work on robots." Shinso asks curiously, "Who's Aizawa?" Izuku answers as he looks at Shinso, "The Erasure hero, Eraserhead." Shinso's eyes go wide in shock. "Seriously? You guys got Eraserhead as your homeroom teacher? That's so amazing." Izuku is somewhat surprised as he's reminded of himself when he used to fanboy about heroes, then asks, "I assume he's your favorite hero?" Shinso blushes embarrassedly as he looks away, scratching his cheek. "Yeah, you could say that." Izuku then says as he looks forward, "Don't worry, you made it to the final round. Plus, you're the only student aside from Hatsum to make it to the final round without being in the hero course. Besides, Hatsum is in the support course and wouldn't dare leave it for anything." Before the two parts ways, Izuku says with his hand out to Shinso, "I look forward to seeing you in class." Shinso looks at Izuku as he smirks and shakes his hand right back at you. The two part ways. As Izuku reaches the area where 1A is waiting, he's greeted with, "Congratulations on your victory, Midoriya. That was super manly." Izuku nods to his classmates in gratitude before he takes his seat. Ojiro taps Izuku on the shoulder, causing him to turn around. Ojiro says with a smile, "Thanks for helping me, Midoriya." Izuku simply replies with a nod, "You're welcome." Uraraka, who's sitting beside Izuku, asks worriedly, "Why did you let him keep hitting you?" Izuku answers as he looks at her, "He needed to vent out his anger. Besides, I can take it." Kirishima comments behind them, "So manly." Uraraka then replies, "But you didn't have to do that." Izuku then asks with a quirked eyebrow, "Isn't that a hero's job description?" Uraraka looks at Izuku in surprise before she starts laughing, "Yeah, I guess you're right." Izuku lets out a barely noticeable smile from Uraraka's laughter before he looks down at the arena for the next match. Present Mike announces for our second match, we have the Ice Prince himself, Shoto Todoroki, versus Class 1 as Residential Tape Dispenser, Hantashiro. Shiro comments in frustration, "Ah, come on. Why don't I get a cool intro?" Midnight then cracks her whip as she yells out, "Begin." Shiro shoots out his tape as he tries to swing Todoroki out of the arena, but Todoroki unleashes a giant glacier, which shocks everyone. Izuku thinks as Todoroki begins to melt the ice after being declared the winner, "You're still letting Endeavor control you. I guess I have no choice but to break that control." The next few matches pass by about as expected. Mei uses Ida in order to advertise her babies. Monoma creates a wall of vines to withstand Kaminari's electricity. Ashido uppercuts Aoyama, and Yaoyorozu gets pushed back by Tokoyami. When Yaoyorozu comes back, she has a composed expression as Jiru asks, "Hey Yamamo, are you alright?" Yaoyorozu fakes a smile as she answers, "Yais, I'm fine." Her stutter doesn't go unnoticed by Jiru, Uraraka, or Izuku, who all collectively stand up and lead Yaoyorozu into an empty hall. Jiru then asks again, "Alright Momo, are you alright?" Yaoyorozu waves her hands dismissively as she replies, "It's alright guys, really. I'm fine." Izuku comments, "There's no point in hiding it, Yaoyorozu. I've told that line many times myself." Uraraka shoots Izuku a worried look before Yaoyorozu lowers her arms and drops her fake smile. Yaoyorozu explains, I thought that I could have done better. I should have done better. I knew that we were in an arena, but I didn't even think about stepping out of the ring when Tokoyami kept pushing me back." To Izuku cuts Yaoyorozu off, "I'm going to stop you right there, Yaoyorozu." Yaoyorozu looks at Izuku, now noticing the tears in her eyes before Izuku says, "There's no point in thinking about what you could have or should have done. The only thing you can do is take this experience and make sure it doesn't happen again." Yaoyorozu looks down, still somewhat depressed, before Jiru says with a lopsided smile, "Hey, how about we try and figure out who's going to win their matches?" Yaoyorozu looks at Jiru somewhat surprised before she wipes her tears away and smiles, "Thanks, Kyoka." Jiru and Yaoyorozu head back to their seats as the next match starts, but Izuku quickly notices Uraraka's absence. Deciding that missing one match won't hurt him, he decides to go and look for Uraraka, since she hadn't said where she was going and she wouldn't have just left one of her friends alone. Izuku calls out her name as he walks through the halls before he stops in front of waiting room. Izuku knocks on the door. "Uraraka, are you in there?" Uraraka replies with a higher-pitched tone, "Yeah, I'm in here." Izuku opens the door to see Uraraka in a seat at the table with a surprised look on her face. Izuku then asks, "Did I startle you?" Uraraka answers with a shaky smile, "Nope." Izuku then replies, "I startled you, didn't I?" Uraraka then lets out a sigh of defeat before Izuku takes a seat across from her. Izuku then comments, "I'm guessing you're worried about your fight against Bakugo, right?" Uraraka replies with a nod, "Yeah. It's just, I don't know how I'm supposed to beat a guy who can just blow up anything he touches." Izuku then counters, "To be fair, you can float anything you touch." Uraraka then looks at Izuku, "Yeah, but he doesn't have to touch me in order to blow me up." Izuku then replies, "You need to calm down. Getting worked up isn't going to help you." Uraraka takes a deep breath before she exhales, "You're right, Midoriya." Izuku then asks, "Now then, what are Bakugo's weaknesses?" Uraraka answers, "I don't know. I mean, I imagine water would be a weakness of his, but I can't control water." Izuku then asks, "All right, what about his strengths?" Uraraka then answers as she thinks, "Well, he's got a quirk that can make stuff explode. He's one of the strongest students in our class, and he has a lot of stamina." Izuku then comments, "All right, now turn those into weaknesses." Uraraka then asks with a confused expression, "What do you mean?" Izuku answers, "In most cases, a person's strength can also be turned into their weakness. All you have to do is turn Bakugo's strengths into his weakness." Uraraka looks down at the table as she thinks, "All right, Bakugo's quirk is explosion. If I can get him to cause enough damage to the stage, I can use the debris in order to attack him." Uraraka shakes her head, "No, that won't work. He'd see it coming before I could even do anything. I can't fight him head-on since he's stronger than me and would obviously beat me in the first 10 seconds, so I need to keep my distance but also lure him into using his quirk." Uraraka's face then brightens with a smile, "Then once I have enough debris, I can use it like a meteor shower." Izuku then asks, I assume you thought of a plan? Uraraka looks up, realizing Izuku has been watching her the whole time. Before she blushes, yeah, I think so. Izuku's eyes soften as he says, you can beat him, Uraraka. You have all the tools at your disposal. Now all you have to do is go out there and win. Uraraka smiles in encouragement as she pumps her fist and stands up. You're right, Izuku. I can do this. Uraraka immediately realizes what she just said as her face turns bright red and looks at Izuku, whose eyes are slightly wider than normal. Did you just call me by my first name? Uraraka places both hands over her blushing face as she floats up to the ceiling. Izuku then walks over to where Uraraka is floating. As he looks up at her, I don't mind you calling me by my first name. I was just surprised that you had done it. Uraraka groans in embarrassment. There's no reason to be embarrassed. Jairu and Yaoyorozu use each other's first names. I don't see why it should be any different between either of us. Izuku realizes nothing is getting through to Uraraka before he says, it's okay, Ochako. I don't mind you using my first name. Ochako opens her eyes in surprise as she turns to look down at Izuku, who's looking up at her. She looks down at Izuku and can't help but think about how handsome he is. Ochako thinks to herself as she's still blushing, but not as much as before. Oh God, I really do have a crush on him. She then shakes her head as she calms herself down before she makes a promise to herself. I need to help Izuku get his feelings back. When he does, I'll tell him how I feel, but not right now. Ochako releases her quirk, causing her to fall down before Izuku catches her and sets her down. Are you all right? Ochako looks up at Izuku's face, not noticing how close together they are. Yeah, I'm fine. Just then, over the intercom, Present Mic announces Ochako, Uraraka, and Katsuki Bakugo report to the arena immediately. Ochako smiles as she walks away. Well, I better go. Ochako looks over her shoulder to look at Izuku with a grin. Wish me luck, Izuku. As Ochako leaves, Izuku places a hand over the hole in his chest as he asks aloud, what is this weird feeling in my chest? The feeling doesn't feel bad, but Izuku can't say he's felt it before. However, the feeling doesn't last before Izuku heads back to the stands to watch Ochako's fight. Present Mic announces on one side we have the gravity-defying girl herself, Ochako Uraraka, versus the bombastic Katsuki Bakugo. Midnight then cracks her whip. Begin. Izuku notices early on what Ochako's plan is and silently admits that it's a rather ingenious, if risky idea. However, he also notices how much damage she is taking throughout the fight. Izuku thinks to himself, she needs to work on her dodging skills if she wants this plan to work. At this point, either Ochako will win by wearing Bakugo down and releasing the debris she's collected, or Bakugo will win by forcing Ochako to exhaust her stamina. At this point, it could go either way. When Ochako releases her quirk, Izuku thinks to himself, it's not enough. He sees Ochako rush towards Bakugo, who has his arms raised to counter the debris before he lets out a giant explosion. As the smoke clears, Izuku can tell just how exhausted Ochako is as he thinks to himself, I should be cheering her on. She's my friend. She was the first to accept me despite the fact that I have no emotions. But I can't. For the first time since his quirk had manifested, Izuku wishes he had his emotions back so that he could genuinely cheer Ochako on. But he can't. Just as Ochako falls to the ground, Izuku gets up and heads to the infirmary, ignoring everything else. He gets there just in time to see her waking up on one of the hospital beds recovery girl has out. Ochako looks at Izuku with a tired smile. Hey, Izuku. Her smile falls. I'm sorry that you wasted your time on me. Izuku walks beside Ochako's bed as he looks down at her. You didn't waste my time, Ochako. You did the best you could. It was a difficult fight for you. But despite everything, you still pushed on. Izuku wonders what he should do as Ochako looks down sadly before he gets an idea. Izuku reaches out with his right hand as he places it on Ochako's head. Izuku states resolutely, you did a good job out there, Ochako. Ochako looks up at Izuku with wide eyes before she tears up and pulls him into a hug, which he awkwardly reciprocates. Meanwhile, Recovery Girl is watching the two of them with a smile on her face as she thinks to herself, these kids are growing up so fast. After a moment, Ochako pulls away, wiping the tears from her eyes before Izuku asks, are you feeling better? Ochako nods before she smiles at Izuku. Thanks, Midoriya. I needed that. Izuku replies, I said that it was all right to call me Izuku, remember? Ochako looks away with a slight blush. Right, I forgot about that. Izuku then asks, would you prefer that I go back to calling you Uraraka? Ochako waves her hands erratically. No, 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 it's fine. I just forgot is all. Izuku then says after Ochako has calmed down. All right then. Present Mike then announces over the intercoms Midoriya and Todoroki report to the arena immediately. Izuku then says as he walks away, guess I should go now. Uraraka then calls out Izuku. Izuku looks back at Ochako, who has a determined expression. Kick his ass. Izuku's lips quirk in amusement before he replies, yes ma'am. Izuku's expression returns to its usual emotionless self as he leaves the room. As Izuku walks through the halls for his next match, Endeavor turns around the corner and steps into his path. Endeavor says as he notices Izuku, I was looking for you. Izuku's eyes narrow in suspicion as he feels the anger from before boiling just beneath his skin. Endeavor continues, I've seen what you're capable of. Your power is pretty impressive despite that pathetic first fight you had. Izuku continues to hold back his anger with a look of indifference. To win not just the first, but also the second round takes quite a bit of strength and skill. It reminds me of All Might with the way you're constantly at the top, no matter the opposition. Endeavor's eyes narrow as he points at Izuku. It's Shoto's duty to surpass All Might as the #1 hero, and his match with you will be a great testing round for how much training he has left. So, hit him hard. Don't disgrace yourself or him by holding back. Izuku grabs Endeavor's arm before he starts squeezing. The amount of pressure Izuku is exerting causes Endeavor's bones to creak as he lets out a cry of pain before he starts kneeling on the ground. Let go of me. Izuku glares down at Endeavor. Using your own offspring in order to achieve your goals for you? How pathetic. Izuku continues as Endeavor glares up at him with a pained expression. You know you can't surpass All Might yourself, so you decide to use your own child. I may not have emotions anymore, but even to me that's heartless. Then again, Izuku points a finger right at Endeavor's face. I'm not weak, pathetic, worthless trash like you. Endeavor growls out, you'd better watch your mouth, boy. Izuku counters, or what? You'll hit me, beat me, burn me, kill me? Izuku then states as his eyes pierces Endeavor's soul, I've been holding back this entire time, not because I feel as though everyone else is beneath me, but rather that if I were to unleash my full power, I'd likely destroy the stadium itself and everyone in it. Endeavor continues to glare at Izuku, not believing him, however. What I find interesting is that you actually believe anyone will even remember you even if Todoroki manages to become the #1 hero. Any achievement that Todoroki makes will be of his own efforts, not yours, and the people will see that. When they look at him, they'll see him, not you. So, when Todoroki does become a hero, and when he inevitably surpasses you, you'll be tossed aside, left to be forgotten as nothing more than a relic of the past. Izuku then lets go of Endeavor's arm as he walks past him. Don't worry though, I plan on showing everyone just how powerful I can be. So that way no one will dare to oppose me, so that the very thought of doing so would be considered a sin in and of itself. Endeavor watches Izuku walk away, not realizing just how close he was to death. As Izuku walks out of the stadium, Present Mike announces, now for the first match of our second set, we have Izuku Midoriya versus Shoto Todoroki. As the two stand opposite of each other, Izuku comments, I hope you've given what I said some thought, because you won't beat me as you are now. Todoroki glares at Izuku before Midnight announces with a crack of her whip, begin. Immediately Todoroki sends forth a glacier, just like in his first match, completely covering half the arena in ice. Present Mike announces, and just like that Todoroki has finished the fight in one hit. Midnight then raises her whip as she calls out Midoriya, is unable to, but she's cut off when green energy bursts upwards from the center of the glacier, completely destroying it into nothing but shards of ice, revealing an untouched Izuku. The audience stare in shock at the arena as the ice shards crash around the two competitors. Izuku states as the anklet from before falls off, broken by Todoroki's attack, if you think that will be enough to stop me, then you're sorely mistaken. Todoroki grits his teeth before he sends out another glacier. But this time Izuku raises his finger at an upward angle before he fires off a Zero to destroy the glacier completely. Present Mike comments, wow, we've got an epic comeback from Midoriya, who seems to still be in the fight. Aizawa adds the attack that Midoriya used to escape and destroy the glacier is called a Zero. He concentrates his energy at the tip of his finger before he fires it, destroying everything in its path. It's at that moment that Endeavor now in the stands watching, recalls how Izuku had pointed his finger right in his face and the emotionless expression on his face. Endeavor realizes that if Izuku wanted to, he could have killed him without even showing the slightest bit of effort. Todoroki sends out wave after wave of ice as Izuku continues to destroy them with his Zeros. Eventually, Todoroki starts breathing heavily while shivering from the ice that has formed on his body. Izuku comments, "Didn't I tell you that people would eventually discover your weakness? If you'd simply use your fire, then you'd be able to counteract the problem you're currently facing." Todoroki bites out, "I refuse to use that bastard's power." Izuku then sonidos right behind Todoroki, who's shocked as he turns around to see Izuku pointing his finger right at him, then die. Todoroki jumps out of the way in fear of being shot by Izuku's Zero, but Izuku doesn't even go to use it. Todoroki flips over as he holds himself up on his elbows as Izuku looks down at him. "You see, any villain would have already killed you by now. The only reason why you're alive is simply because I allowed it. I could kill you at any moment, and yet you continue to hold yourself back. Are you really going to allow yourself to die because of that pathetic piece of trash?" Todoroki counters as he feels himself overcome with fear to refuse to use his power. Izuku then asks as he glares down at Todoroki, "Tell me, who am I fighting?" Todoroki's eyes widen in shock from the question, "Am I fighting Endeavor or Shoto Todoroki?" Todoroki answers hesitantly, "You're fighting me." Izuku then states, "Then get up and use your power already." Todoroki replies, "I can't use his." Izuku cuts in, "It's your power." Todoroki looks up at Izuku in shock, "Your power, not his. Now stand up and fight me like you mean it." Todoroki recalls how his mother told him to be the kind of hero that he wanted to be, and that he wasn't bound by his heritage before his flames burst from his left side. As Todoroki stands up, Present Mike announces, "What's this?" It looks like Todoroki has finally started to use his fire. In the crowd, Endeavor smiles shakily as he thinks, "Yes. Now Shoto can." Endeavor's thoughts stop as he notices Izuku's expression remains unchanged and gets a sinking feeling in his stomach. Todoroki comments, "Helping out your opponent in the middle of a fight? You must be insane." Izuku then replies, "Perhaps, but then we wouldn't really be able to see how powerful you really are." Izuku then takes a step back so that he's in the center of the arena before he says, "So, as a reward for finally using your full power, I'll show you my first transformation." Todoroki watches curiously before Izuku starts exerting green and black energy before he says, "Imprison Murcielago." Izuku is then enveloped by the black and green energy as the ground shakes beneath the stadium. The energy itself bursts upwards into the sky before falling back down like rain. As the rain falls onto the audience, they all feel a heaviness fall upon their shoulders as if the rain is pulling them down. As the rain disappears, everyone looks down at the arena to see Izuku. His hair is longer and is now straight, with giant, black bat wings on his back torn through his uniform, and the slim green tear stains on his face are now larger and dark gray rather than green. Everyone stares in shock of Izuku's new